4 years after Emperor Cardion ascended the throne of Eshreshar, the conquest of the rebellious neighboring kingdoms begins. Amidst the chaos of that brutal war, a solitary young mercenary emerges, hiding his true past. His gaze remains steady and dark as he loses himself in memories of the pivotal moment that changed his life forever. In the past, the young man is completely taken aback when his own father tells him he will soon have to get married, demanding an explanation in his father's office. The young man learns that the chosen bride is a lady from the noble house Wibben. His father explains that she is 16 years old, strikingly beautiful, and loves tending to the garden flowers. The door to the room opens softly so the noble lady can finally enter and meet her husband-to-be. At just 14 years old, the young boy nervously contemplates marrying a noble woman he has never laid eyes on. Sweating from pure nerves, he can barely believe how quickly this marriage was decided. Completely dazed, the boy tries to process the inevitable reality that he is about to be wed. Unable to understand his father's decision, he finds it strange that a highborn lady would agree to marry into his family. Dainty footsteps echo through the hall as he wonders why a proud noblewoman would ever say yes to him. Gripping his pants in anxious dread, he asks himself why a noble would settle for the son of mere merchants. The golden-haired maiden appears in an elegant dress, greeting him warmly, and saying it is a pleasure to meet him. With cheeks flushed red before her beauty, the young boy is utterly captivated the moment he locks eyes with Lady Tyria Wibben. Delicately holding the hem of her gown, Tyria Wibben formally introduces herself, carrying an air of absolute poise. Her golden hair resembles fields of wheat, while her green eyes radiate a deeply captivating warmth. Her porcelain skin contrasts with vivid red lips like ripe cherries, completely mesmerizing the young boy. Before such a striking presence, the boy recognizes an aura brimming with both elegance and mystery. His father rests a hand on young Elric's shoulder and tells him to greet the girl, snapping him out of his trance. Awkward and flustered, Arik bows timidly to return the greeting, saying it is an honor to meet her. Even amidst all his confusion, one crystal clear thought begins to take root in his mind. Standing at the altar during the ceremony, he realizes that from this moment on, he will spend the rest of his days by Tyria's side. Watching the bride hold her flowers, he recognizes that sweet feeling as his very first love. Embarrassed that he cannot wipe the grin off his face, he tries to hide his joy during the traditional exchange of rings. As he slides the band onto Tyria's finger, he scrunches his brow, trying desperately not to beam ear to ear. Without him noticing, the young bride wore a somber, downcast expression throughout the entire wedding ceremony. The boy had no idea of the deep, silent sorrow that this forced union was carving into the bride's heart. A storm strikes the imposing mansion, its facade lit from within as heavy rain pours down upon the estate. Inside the room, a lone candle flame burns, casting a gentle amber glow against the creeping darkness. Sitting on the bed, Arik gently traces the wedding ring on his finger, reflecting on the sudden circumstances of his marriage. He smiles, blushing and happy, realizing that such a refined, elegant woman is now his lawfully wedded wife. The memory of his father in the study returns, driving home the prestige of his new wife hailing from the noble house Wibben. His satisfied smile slowly begins to fade as uneasy doubts take over his thoughts. The more he dwells on it, the more he feels there is something unusual and unexplainable behind this entire arrangement. Sitting on the sofa, he asks the maid why a noble lady would ever accept the heir of a merchant family. The bespectacled maid looks away, hesitating deeply, unsure of how to break the delicate truth to the young master. Elric presses further and urges Rhonda to tell him everything, reminding her that she knows all the estate's inner workings. Rhonda remains silent with a tense expression, hesitating before laying out the harsh reality to the young boy. Hearing the confirmation that it is purely a marriage of convenience, the boy's eyes widen in utter shock. The maid explains that while House Wibben once had glory, they went bankrupt and drowned in debt, left without a coin to survive. To pay off those debts and provide the needed funds, the merchant family demanded this marriage in return. Rhonda states that House Portman used the financial deal to buy their way into high society, leaving the boy speechless. Shaken to the core, he asks if his bride was essentially bought and sold to his family, and the maid's silence confirms it all. Incredulous before the cold reality reality. Auric panics as the true, ugly nature of this forced engagement sinks in. Overcome with crushing guilt, the boy clutches his head in despair, agonizing over his own selfish joy at the wedding. Acting on pure impulse, the young master throws the door open and bolts out as the startled maid desperately calls after him. Sprinting frantically through the corridors, his only thought is to find his wife and explain everything right away. Bursting across the illuminated courtyard, he runs with fierce resolve, driven by the desperate urge to offer her a sincere apology. Breathless and frantic, the boy races ahead, longing to offer any explanation that might ease the terrible situation. Leaning against the hallway wall, the young boy struggles to catch his breath after running so desperately. Bent over in sheer exhaustion, he leans on the wall, breathing heavily as he tries to calm his racing heart. Mouth agape and sweat dripping down his face, the panting boy tries to steady his burning lungs. Approaching the grand, ornate bedroom door, he reaches out for the handle, ready to push it open and step inside. Touching the door, the young man suddenly freezes at the muffled sound of weeping coming from within. Peeking carefully through the crack of the door, he looks inside as the quiet sobs continue to echo in the room. He sees his bride, her face flushed and tears streaming down her cheeks. Overcome with profound sorrow, the young girl is curled up on the floor, hugging her knees tightly as she weeps in total loneliness and despair. The boy is left completely paralyzed and heartbroken, witnessing the silent agony of his new companion. Watching her bitter tears, he slowly steps back, making an immediate decision about the future that lies ahead. Glancing back one last time, he firmly resolves that he will do whatever it takes to break this sham of a marriage. Inside the quiet study, his father continues to write diligently with a quill, ink gliding smoothly across the paper. The patriarch sits in his large chair, with his back to the entrance. When he hears hurried footsteps approaching, the young man storms into the study, throwing the doors wide open and calling out to his father in sheer distress. Standing in the middle of the room, he demands without hesitation that his father immediately annul the wedding that just took place. Elric confronts his father, asking if the girl only married him to save her house and was practically bought by them. His voice cracking, eyes brimming with sheer desperation, the boy begs fervently for his father to call off the union. The man cuts the argument short, calling his son's name in a voice so cold and sharp it makes the boy freeze in his tracks. Wearing a stern, intimidating scowl, the father scolds the boy, commanding him to stop acting like a child this instant. The man declares with absolute authority that they are now nobility, ordering his son to start behaving like a true highborn. His father's frigid, merciless glare forces the boy to remember a cruel truth that had always haunted his family. Clenching his fists tightly, he is reminded once again of why he never received a shred of fatherly affection. He remembers that he was always blamed for his mother's death during childbirth, making him the eternal target of his father's resentment. The boy realizes he has only ever been treated as a puppet and a tool, used to bring prestige and repay the cost of his upbringing. Feeling the cold disdain in the air, the young man turns his back on his father and walks out of the study with purposeful strides. Glancing back in disgust, he finally accepts that for his entire life, he was never anything more than a pawn. Driven by unshakable resolve, the boy heads for the exit, determined to vanish from that mansion forever, to spare the bride bought with money, and shatter his father's grand ambitions. The young man plans to run away without a trace. Gripping the door tightly, he summons the courage to leave his entire life of luxury behind. Clutching his small bundle in the hallway, the boy solemnly vows to cast away the Portman name once and for all. Heavy rain pours relentlessly over the wheat fields in the dark of night, marking the start of a brand new journey. Carrying a pack on his back and a sword in hand, the young boy walks across the open fields through the rain, never looking back. As he walks, he wonders if Tyria's tears were from the pain of being sold or the agony of leaving her family behind. The lingering doubt that she might have simply felt revulsion toward him crosses his mind as he recalls her weeping. Under the pouring rain, the boy pauses for a moment and gazes at the horizon, letting his quiet thoughts fade into silence. He pushes those thoughts aside, telling himself none of it matters anymore, since he is leaving for good. The massive stone fortress rises beneath the gray, rain-swept skies, serving as a haven for the region's mercenaries. The battle, hardened veteran, built like a wall with weathered eyes, shows genuine surprise at the newcomer's unusual request. Towering over the kid, the burly man asks in dead earnest if he truly came all this way to become a mercenary. With a piercing gaze stripped of all doubt, the boy answers yes, displaying absolute certainty. Holding the hilt at his hip, the young man reveals his new identity, stating firmly before the warrior that his name is now Kasha. Casting aside his former life, the boy spends the next 10 years on the battlefield, wading through fallen bodies, brandishing a blood-stained blade. He drifts through desperate battles, searching for nothing more than a decent place to die. Known across the land only as the demon sword Kasha, he becomes a feared warrior, his face permanently bathed in blood. Clad in full-plate armor with a greatsword in hand, he watches the enemy army assemble along the horizon at dusk. Now a seasoned, battle-tested adult, the dark-cloaked mercenary stands tall against the sunset-lit field. With a calm expression and steely eyes, he locks his focus on the enemies advancing across the distant valley. The enemy lines advance in tight formation, brandishing spears, shields, and crossbows under the crimson glow of the sky. Standing alone in the heart of the valley, the warrior drops into a combat stance, ready to face the ranks of enemy soldiers. He raises his gleaming blade with two steady hands as the steel glints against the dying golden rays of twilight. He bursts forward at blinding speed, unleashing a violent strike that cuts a brilliant arc of energy through the air. With blood splattered across his face, the warrior keeps his eyes locked forward, completely unfazed in the face of death. Years later, in a quiet and cozy tavern, patrons chat among themselves while the bartender tends to the counter. The entrance bell chimes throughout the establishment, prompting the tavern keeper to glance up and see who just walked in. The man offers a polite greeting while taking note of the traveler's hand, resting carefully on a wooden cane. Draped in a dark overcoat, the veteran walks slowly with a visible limp as he quietly enters the room. The patrons cut their conversations short, turning their attention toward the newcomer, limping slowly across the floor. A few men whisper in astonishment, recognizing the living legend known as the dreaded demon sword of the battlefield. Other regulars murmur quietly about the warrior's leg injury, trying to piece together what could have happened. Seeing him approach the counter, the tavern keeper curiously asks about the cause of his obvious limp. The young man simply replies that it is just a minor war wound, while the bartender notes that such stories are common these days. Asked how bad the injury is, he opens a newspaper and calmly remarks that it will stay like this for quite some time. Suddenly, his hand grips the pages tightly, crushing the paper as he comes across a piece of utterly shocking news. Noticing the traveler's sudden, frozen reaction, the tavern keeper shows concern and tries to ask what is wrong. Eyes wide in absolute disbelief, the young man ignores the question entirely, his gaze locked onto the printed article. A portrait of his late father, Hoven Portman, sits in the corner of the page, confirming the news of the patriarch's death. The steam locomotive races down the tracks, cutting through the countryside beneath the golden rays of a stunning sunset. Inside the carriage, he sits deep in thought, staring out the window with his cane. Beside him, as he reflects on recent events, he recalls with profound bitterness the image of the man he loathed so much, printed as a tiny notice in the corner of the paper. The image of Hoven Portman floods his mind, bringing back the weight of a decade's worth of built-up resentment against his father. He remembers that when he ran away in his youth, a small part of him still harbored the foolish hope that his father might come looking for him. Being only 14 back then, he now recognizes that his childish hope was nothing more than naive wishful thinking. Looking back through the rain in his memories, he admits that yearning for a father's love did not seem entirely pointless at the time, even if he was only viewed as a tool to enrich the family and blamed for the tragic death of his own mother. Deep beneath all that bitterness, he was still just a child desperately and fruitlessly seeking affection from his own flesh and blood. Sitting in his compartment with his head hanging low, he chuckles bitterly at how absurd it was to ever expect love from such a cold-hearted man. With the train's smoke drifting into the night sky, he realizes that the sole target of all his hatred and resentment is finally gone. Using his father's funeral as an excuse, he decides to return to his homeland to confront his own cowardly past. Carrying nothing but a quiet emptiness in his chest, the train slows down with a shower of sparks as it pulls into the station platform. the arrival announcement rings through the terminal, signaling that the long journey to the Wibben territory has finally come to an end. The vast fields of golden wheat sway gently in the breeze beneath the warm, nostalgic glow of a beautiful late afternoon. Walking down the dirt path, he notices that even after 10 years away, the place has remained completely unchanged. The quiet streets, blanketed with reddish autumn leaves, bring an overwhelming sense of peace to the rural landscape. Watching the villagers stroll by at a leisurely pace proves that this quiet hamlet was left untouched by the horrors of war. Children run happily down the road as he takes in the scenery, so intimately familiar, yet now feeling almost foreign. Planting his cane patiently into the dirt with every step, the traveler limps along his way, kicking up dust on the country road. Feeling the gentle breeze against his face, a faint, nostalgic smile touches his lips as he takes in the welcoming air of his old home. Gazing out at the horizon, he recognizes that the iconic wheat fields, the very symbol of this territory, remain frozen in time. He is reminded of his distant childhood, when he would happily play hide and seek with the other boys from this very village. Another memory surfaces, recalling the scoldings he received from the maid whenever he tracked dirt onto his clothes during play. With every step along the golden path, the sweet memories of his childhood grow sharper and more vivid. Wearing a peaceful expression, the young man lets out a soft sigh of relief, immersing himself in memories that seemed lost to time. Suddenly, his footsteps grind to an abrupt halt on the dirt track as something unexpected catches his eye ahead. His eyes go wide and he is struck completely speechless. His gaze locked onto a familiar figure standing in the middle of the field. The memory of young Tyria in her bridal gown rushes back, making him wonder what her life must be like now. He assumes that, given her breathtaking beauty, she must be doing well and happily married to a noble worthy of her status. A delicate hand tenderly brushes the stalks of wheat, while the breeze whispers softly through the golden crops. Hearing someone call out the name of Lady Tyria Wibben, the young man jolts, overcome with absolute shock. A maid rushes over, scolding the young woman in the straw hat for carrying heavy bundles, while Eric watches on in sheer disbelief. The maid offers to take the harvest off her hands, while the young man stares, stunned to see Tyria again. After all these years, he asks in disbelief if that woman is truly Tyria Wibben, just as she turns, startled to notice his presence. The startled maid calls out to her lady as Tyria calmly begins walking toward the newly arrived traveler, cradling the bundle of golden wheat in her arms. The young woman stops before him and asks what brings him here. From beneath the brim of her straw hat, Tyria maintains a serene gaze and asks without hesitation why he is still standing there. The two stand face to face under the golden twilight sky as she finishes her question regarding his return. Staring at the woman standing before him, the young veteran tries to muster a reply, but his voice fails him in the face of such shock. Tyria repeats the question with a calm, direct expression, wanting to know the real reason behind his return. Face slightly flushed from the awkwardness of the moment, Eric hesitates, struggling to find any words to explain himself. With complete composure and matter-of-fact certainty, the young woman calmly states that she is still here simply because she is his wife. Hearing those words, the young man hangs his head with a bitter smile. Realizing just how foolish his assumptions had been, he reflects in shame on how naive he was to think that simply running away would ever undo a binding marriage. Watching her walk ahead of him, he admits to himself that if it were so easy to break, she never would have been sold to his family in the first place. He tears himself apart inside, wondering if his reckless childhood impulse ended up trapping Tyria and robbing her of her freedom. Tyria continues walking through the sunset-lit field while the young man sinks deeper into guilt and remorse. He feels entirely stripped of his pride, crushed by the harsh reality forced upon the woman who was bound to him. Standing alone in the wheat field, he grieves in silence, seeing himself as nothing more than a selfish, pathetic coward. Memories of his bloody mercenary days flash through his mind, showing the trail of violence he left behind. He can only imagine the agonizing loneliness and hardships Tyria must have endured completely on her own for 10 long years. Leaning heavily on his cane, cane. An urgent need to apologize washes over him, but uncertainty paralyzes him on the spot. The boy questions whether he even has the right to apologize, terrified that his wife might not even want to hear his regrets. Sweating nervously and thoroughly embarrassed, he tries to start a conversation, stammering without being able to string a clear sentence together, with a steady, unreadable look from beneath her hat. Tyria simply watches him in complete silence, waiting for him to speak, breaking the heavy tension. The young woman calmly turns and practically suggests they head inside the main estate. Tyria begins walking toward the manor, while Elric follows closely behind, carefully maneuvering his wooden cane. Following behind the noblewoman, the young man keeps a solemn, brooding expression, trying to process the storm brewing in his chest. Deep down, he grits his teeth and quietly wishes she would at least show some anger for having been abandoned like that. He envisions a terrifying scenario where she offers only a cold smile, harboring a deep-seated resentment for everything that occurred. The fear that she might ask what he even came back for after all these years hangs heavy over his mind. Terrified by his own dark assumptions, the veteran shudders, his eyes widening in a sudden wave of panic. Breaking into a cold sweat with an anxious look, the veteran tries to shake off the dread as he walks slowly beside the noblewoman. Seen from above under the golden twilight glow, the two make their way down the path winding through the vast wheat fields. Tyria pauses and looks back over her shoulder with mild curiosity, calmly asking if he is going to walk with her. Caught off guard by her patient demeanor, the young man blinks in astonishment, hesitating a moment before reacting, planting his hand firmly on his cane with renewed focus. Eric quickly replies that he is right behind her. He quickens his pace, limping along the dirt trail to fall into step beside the young woman beneath the fiery crimson sunset. The grand facade of the Portman estate rises before them, bathed in the warm, vibrant glow of a stunning dusk. Reaching the entrance, Tyria asks him to wait there for a moment while she steps inside to fetch the head butler. The young woman pushes open the glass door and steps inside the manor, leaving the young man alone on the walkway, watching her calm departure. Standing before the entrance, Eric gazes up at the estate with a thoughtful look, swallowed by a powerful wave of nostalgia. Looking at the imposing windows and grand pillars, he notices with surprise that the manor's structure is completely identical to how it used to be. He can barely believe that 10 whole years have passed as he looks at the courtyard and central fountain, both preserved in pristine condition. Every small stain on the masonry and the exact number of second-floor windows remained etched with absolute clarity in his mind. A faint, subtle smile of relief touches the young man's lips as he takes in the comforting familiarity of the surroundings. A woman's voice suddenly speaks up from behind, politely inquiring about his identity and his business on the grounds. The young man turns his head, startled by the sudden interruption, letting out a gasp of surprise as he looks at the newcomer. The maid, wearing glasses and a spotless uniform, approaches with rigid posture, asking who he is looking for on the property. Recognizing the familiar face in an instant, the young man calls out the maid Runda's name with bright excitement in his eyes. Ulrich remarks enthusiastically that even after a full decade away, the devoted maid had barely aged a single day. With a warm grin on his face, he tilts his head and asks playfully if she really does not remember him. Rhonda adjusts her glasses and studies him with a blank, thoughtful expression, clearly struggling to place the man standing before her. Rhonda's eyes widen behind her glasses as she suddenly realizes who is standing right in front of her, her voice trembling with shock. The maid gasps out the young master's name while he keeps a warm smile on his face. Overcome with emotion, Rhonda grabs his hands, wanting to make sure this man standing before her really is young Elric. Elric warmly returns the hug, tenderly telling her that he has finally come home after all this time. With tears in her eyes, the devoted maid rests her head against his chest, relieved to have her young master back home. Stepping back in the field, she marvels at how much he's changed, saying she almost didn't recognize him. The young man calmly agrees, saying it makes complete sense she wouldn't recognize him after going through so many changes. He recalls the firm words Tyria had spoken just minutes earlier, stating she was still here because she is his lawful wife. Eric turns his head thoughtfully and mentions the 10 years he spent on the battlefield, leaving the maid intrigued by what he said. Noticing the young master's distant look, Rhonda asks with concern if something is wrong. He reflects on the fact that if even Rhonda, who raised him, barely recognized him, how could Tyria have known who he was so quickly? The image of Tyria holding wheat in the middle of the field flashes in his mind as he continues trying to make sense of it all. Sweating with uncertainty, the young man tries to find a logical explanation for how he was recognized with such ease. Gazing at the mansion, he wonders how the young lady could possibly know his identity from just a single glance in the wheat field. Inside the manor, the window curtains sway gently in the breeze as the late afternoon sun illuminates the room. From the bedroom balcony, Tyria rests her hands on the glass, watching Elric's conversation with the maid down below. In absolute silence, the noblewoman gazes at her husband from afar, feeling her heart race at seeing him again after 10 years. Sensing someone watching him, the young man turns sharply toward the mansion's window with a sharp, suspicious glare. Startled by being caught, Tyria quickly steps back and places a hand over her chest, trying to steady her breathing. With flushed cheeks and her face partially hidden in the shadows, she lets out a breathy sigh, recalling every striking detail about him. She clearly remembers the distinct scar on the back of his neck, which remained completely unchanged despite all the years that had passed. The brown shade of his hair and the intensity of his gaze remained deeply etched in the young woman's memory. To her, nothing essential about him had changed, which is why she recognized him the very moment she laid eyes on him. Later, while relaxing in a bubble bath, Eric is still puzzled by the mystery of their reunion. Soaking in the warm water, the muscular young man ponders how Lady Tyria was able to identify him with such certainty out in the field. He rests a bare foot outside the water, sending small ripples across the tub as he decides it's time to wrap up his bath. Wearing a white robe that leaves the scars on his chest exposed, he casually ties the sash around his waist. Suddenly, his eyes go wide with utter shock when he hears an unexpected sound at the room's door. Tyria walks into the room wearing only a bath towel, and both freeze on the spot at such an awkward encounter. The young woman's face turns bright red with embarrassment as she lets out a muffled gasp at the sight of him. Clutched tightly to her towel, she stammers out apologies in a state of comical, flustered panic. With tears of pure embarrassment in her eyes, the noblewoman is on the verge of crying, while Elric frantically tells her to try and calm down. Trying to reassure her, the young man gestures with his hands, but she trips over her own feet and loses her balance. Reacting quickly, Elric firmly catches her by the face and body, keeping her from crashing awkwardly to the floor. Marie, the maid, walks into the room carrying a laundry basket and lets out an ear-piercing scream upon witnessing the intimate scene. In a total panic, the maid throws everything into the air and dashes barefoot down the hallway. Convinced her lady is in deep trouble, she bursts back into the room, throwing the doors wide open and screaming frantically to find out what's going on. Marie freezes in shock seeing the man in the robe holding a half-naked Tyria in his arms in an extremely compromising position. With Tyria nestled against his chest, Eric stands there jaw dropped and speechless, caught red-handed in such an embarrassing situation. With her face burning with pure shame, the young noblewoman tries to stammer out her maid's name in utter mortification. The young man frantically tries to explain himself, saying he only grabbed her to stop her from falling, but realizes he just made things worse. In a wartime flashback, guards from the kingdom of Chever hold their defensive shield line at the border. Vanguard Knight Lebron of the Imperial Army leads the charge with a sadistic, taunting grin amidst the smoke. The guard soldiers charge forward screaming, clashing against the enemy vanguard in a desperate attempt to halt their advance. LeBron brandishes his heavy sword and roars menacingly, vowing to slaughter any warrior who crosses his path. With brutal, bloodthirsty strikes, the knight tears through the defending troops, sending soldiers' bodies flying through the air. Terrified by the slaughter, the surviving soldiers panic, realizing the overwhelming difference in military might. The commander orders an immediate retreat, and the men scatter in a chaotic rush, scrambling for cover behind their defense lines. Amidst the soldiers' desperate escape, Kasha calmly walks in the opposite direction, his sword resting over his shoulder. The invaders halt their march and stare in surprise at the lone warrior, wondering if he's just some local mercenary. Gripping his sword with precision, the young mercenary takes his combat stance, ready to face the enemies ahead. With a piercing glare devoid of any hesitation, he coldly stares down the troops advancing toward him. An imperial soldier leaps fiercely through the air, swinging his blade with a sadistic grin in an attempt to cut the boy down. In a swift, precise motion, the young man dodges the strike and counters, landing a clean slash across his opponent. The young man's blade slices through the air at blinding speed as he advances coldly across the battlefield. The blow hits the enemy dead on, drawing blood and making the soldier scream in agony before collapsing onto the dirt. The defeated warrior drops to his knees covered in blood, while the mercenary is already lining up his next strike. In one fluid, relentless motion, he cuts down another soldier, carving a path right through the enemy's defensive lines. The soldier's body is sliced in two, crashing to the ground while the rest of the squad watches in sheer horror. Paralyzed by such overwhelming violence, the Imperial Guards tremble and break into a cold sweat, too terrified to take another step. Walking over the fallen bodies, the young man introduces himself, firmly declaring that he is Kushida, a mercenary of Chever. He dares his opponents to attack all at once, mercilessly promising to wipe out every single man standing there. Suddenly, the young mercenary feels a ripple in the air, and his eyes go wide as he senses a lethal attack incoming. Clenching his fist in a flash, he conjures his mana shield, bringing up a powerful magical barrier to protect himself. The projectile slams into the energy shield with thunderous force, shattering the defense and dragging the young man backward across the dirt. Leaning heavily on his sword planted in the ground, he drops to his knees as blood gushes freely from his wounded leg. Groaning in pain and drenched in sweat, the young man grits his teeth, trying to endure the devastating impact of that direct shot. High atop a rocky cliff, two dark silhouettes watch the aftermath of the shot under a stormy, rain-swept sky. The pair of snipers, dressed in top hats, goggles, and gas masks, hold the rifle with complete calm. Snapping awake from the terrible nightmare, Eric's eyes shoot open in sheer panic as he gasps for air in short, ragged breaths. On high alert in bed, he grips a sharp knife in his hands, still haunted by the trauma of that bloody battlefield. With his heart pounding and sweat dripping down his forehead, he tries to steady himself and regain his composure. Slowly lowering the blade, the young man looks around, taking in the peaceful morning light filling the grand bedroom. Soft sunlight streams through the windows, illuminating the elegant furniture of the quiet, luxurious room in the mansion. Looking down at the knife in his hands, he lets out a sigh of relief, remembering that he's finally back at his old home. A sudden knock on the door startles him, prompting him to swiftly hide the knife beneath the bedsheets. A voice from outside asks if the young master is already awake, while he carefully finishes putting the blade away. Trying to hide his agitation, the veteran takes a deep breath and straightens up in bed before answering the maid at the door. In a steady, composed voice, he confirms that he is awake and gives the maid permission to enter. Flashing a calm smile to hide any lingering tension, he casually says that he just woke up. The maid enters the room, carrying a basin of water in her hands while the young man watches her from the edge of the bed. He notes with pleasant surprise that his simple request for cold water was answered immediately with a full basin. Dressed in fresh clothes, he is amazed by how soft the fabric feels, resting light and remarkably comfortable on his body. Standing before the mirror and leaning on his cane, he reflects on the unearned luxury he now enjoys in this mansion. He tries to smile at his reflection, but notices how forced and unnatural it looks after years of relentless fighting. Walking with his cane, he wonders if his long time on the battlefield ended up freezing his facial expressions completely. Rhonda enters the room and compliments the young man with a warm smile, telling him he looks so much better in those clothes. With a polite bow, the maid invites him down to the dining room to have his very first breakfast back home. Noticing his limp, Rhonda asks about the injury, and Eric lies, claiming he tripped on a hill and hit a rock. He hides the truth about the bullet lodged in his knee, not wanting the caring woman to worry over him for nothing. Rhonda playfully teases him as a troublemaker, and the young man laughs awkwardly, insisting that what happened yesterday was just a misunderstanding. The dining room doors swing open, revealing Tyria and her maid waiting for Elric to join them at the table. The noblewoman with braided blonde hair is bathed in the morning light, radiating an aura of pure grace and serenity. With a gentle smile, Tyria turns to greet him and warmly asks if he managed to sleep well last night. The embarrassing memory of the bathroom incident rushes into Eric's mind, bringing back the image of a blushing Tyria in her towel, with her cheeks burning with anger. Marie the maid glares daggers at the young man and bluntly calls him a pervert right there in the room. Marie keeps grumbling indignantly in the middle of the hall, while Tyria and Rhonda look on at the comical scene beside Elric. Rhonda gives the young maid a light smack on the head, scolding her lack of manners for spreading bathhouse rumors around the house. Tyria walks past the young man with a serene smile, wishing him a wonderful day, while the maid gets another playful scolding. Completely embarrassed by all the commotion, the veteran clears his throat, desperately trying to mask his awkwardness. Trying to break the ice, the young man greets her with a pleasant smile, saying he slept very well thanks to her. Walking over to the table, Eric asks for the new maid's name, and Tyria calmly replies that she is called Marie. When Tyria mentions Marie's rude remark, the young man smacks the table in embarrassment and hastily tries to change the subject. Flustered, he gestures awkwardly and insists that his wife shouldn't pay any mind to the maid's insolent comment. He rests his hand firmly on the cane leaning against the table, trying his best to regain his composure in front of the beautiful noblewoman. With a slight blush on his face, he looks away, explaining that he only asked out of sheer curiosity about the staff. Looking at her husband with her expressive golden eyes, the noblewoman simply nods with calm understanding. The two begin having their breakfast in silence, with only the clinking of silverware echoing through the grand hall. Tyria enjoys her meal peacefully, keeping an elegant posture and a gentle expression with every bite. The young woman opens her eyes upon hearing a soft cough from the young man, who hesitates before trying to start up a conversation again, cutting the food on his plate with visible nervousness. Elric works up the courage to bring up yesterday's embarrassing incident. The moment he specifies that he's talking about running into each other in the bathroom, Tyria turns bright red on the spot. The young man tries to apologize for what happened, but the noblewoman quickly cuts him off, shyly reassuring him that everything is fine between them. Tyria insists that he shouldn't worry and tells him to finish his meal, while Eric awkwardly nods at the table. With her cheeks burning red, the young woman clutches her dress in a desperate attempt to contain her overwhelming embarrassment. In absolute silence, she steals a curious, attentive glance at the man now sitting across from her in the room. Scratching the back of his neck in embarrassment, the young man hears his wife softly say his name, making his heart skip a beat. Tyria's mind flashes back to the sight of Elric's muscular build in his robe during their recent run. In the bathroom, she emotionally reflects on the countless scars across his chest, wondering what kind of brutal life he must have lived. An awkward silence settles between the couple once again as they both continue eating from opposite ends of the long table. Elric panics on the inside over the heavy atmosphere, deeply regretting ever bringing up that embarrassing topic. Desperate to escape the awkwardness, he begins wolfing down the rest of his breakfast at an astonishing speed. With his mouth completely full, he hastily wipes his lips with a napkin, leaving Tyria quite surprised by the hilarious sight. Standing up from his chair with a thumbs up, the young man takes his quick leave, wishing his wife a pleasant meal. In a sweet, gentle tone, the noblewoman replies softly, accepting her husband's abrupt departure from the room. Offering a warm, blushing smile, she wishes him a wonderful and productive day around the estate. In the main hall of the mansion, several servants are busy cleaning and doing chores as the morning routine carries on. Accompanied by Rhonda, Eric greets the household staff, receiving warm, respectful welcomes from everyone. Some servants tease the young man, joking about him lunging at his wife and praising him as a true man of action. Marie storms into the hallway with her hands on her hips and a furious glare, bluntly calling him a pervert right to his face. The young maid complains indignantly to her coworkers, telling everyone to use some common sense and stop defending him. She keeps up her outraged rant until an imposing male voice rings out across the hall, instantly catching her attention. The elderly butler steps in with an understanding smile, telling the young maid not to be so hard on the young master. The bespectacled old man proudly states that it is the duty of the nobility to produce heirs, leaving the maid utterly stunned. He praises Elric's actions as exemplary noble behavior, while Marie insists the whole thing was nothing more than pure lust. The butler and the maid keep bickering heatedly, while the young man breaks into a cold sweat from sheer embarrassment over their comments. The old man cheerfully asks if the young master's back for good to take over his duties, and Eric just gives an awkward chuckle. Leaning on his cane, the young man admits to himself that he still has no concrete plans for his future. He plans to stay temporarily because of his injured knee, but doesn't feel he has any right to act as the master of the manor. Eric changes the subject, saying he needs to head out, and the butler readily agrees, stating that what matters most is his return. The young man asks butler Aldio to prepare a carriage, and the old man complies with a respectful bow. The horse-drawn carriage departs the estate, cutting along the dirt road straight through the golden wheat field. Standing in the middle of the field, Tyria holds her straw hat and watches the carriage pull away beneath the bright sun. The gentle breeze rustles the noblewoman's blonde braids as she gazes at the horizon with a calm, enigmatic expression. Seen from above, the carriage travels down a path lined with autumn trees, red leaves drifting down as it goes. The carriage stops near a country cemetery, and Eric steps out, walking with his cane toward his late father's grave. With a solemn look heavy with emotion, the veteran breaks the silence, stating it has been a very long time since his departure. The headstone, carved with the family crest, stands tall under the open sky as autumn leaves and petals dance in the wind. With his face weighed down by sorrow, he quietly confesses the deep resentment he had long harbored in his chest toward the man standing before Hoven's grave. The young man laments bitterly, admitting he never wished for a reunion like this. He reflects on his father's life, a ruthless man who made the family wealthy but accumulated countless enemies along the way. Facing the headstone, the young man bitterly asks if his father had ever once offered him a single smile or a warm word. He laments in silence, thinking that if the patriarch wanted to play the villain, he should have at least lived a little longer. Dry leaves dance around the grave while the young veteran stands quietly, gazing up at the morning sky. In a calm, sincere voice, he confesses to the grave that he no longer holds that much bitterness in his wounded heart. Elric breaks the silence and calls for butler Aldio, looking to clear up a question that's still deeply troubling him. Asked about the patriarch's passing, the old man steps forward and reveals that Hoven suffered from heart disease. The old man explains that the illness was kept secret until the very end, known only to himself and the family's personal physician. Aldio explains that upon learning of his impending death, the man dedicated his final days to liquidating all his businesses and assets. With a wry smile, the young man remarks that he finds the butler's loyalty quite unusual and surprising. Leaning on his cane, he openly questions why the old man served such a cold, ruthless person with such unwavering loyalty. The butler answers frankly and with good humor, saying he only served for the money and had no other special motive. Elric looks at the old man with his red eyes and notices the servant hasn't asked a single question about the inheritance. The servant recalls that the patriarch converted the family's entire wealth into funds before passing away, leaving behind a fortune in gold. The young veteran listens intently to the revelations, trying to wrap his head around what happened to that massive sum of money. Standing beside the grave, Aldio solemnly confirms that the entire massive fortune was left exclusively to the young man. The carriage makes its way back along the road lined with beautiful autumn trees, golden leaves carpeting the rural path. Inside the carriage, the young man rests his chin on his hand and asks the butler if his late father left behind any written will. The old man explains that the document contained strictly practical instructions regarding the inheritance. Showing no emotion whatsoever, Gripping the handle of his cane tightly, Eric is still at a loss regarding the true intentions behind his father's actions. He reflects on how the patriarch had always acted with extreme coldness in every matter, including when handling that marriage. Guiding the horses through the countryside, the butler advises the young master to take his time and think carefully about the inheritance he received. The image of the beautiful Tyria bathed in sunlight reappears in the young man's mind, bringing a new doubt to his heart. He wonders why the lady continued living in the mansion, considering his desertion should have invalidated their marriage entirely. Aldio points out that their union was a marriage of convenience, functioning merely as a business transaction between two families. The young man finds the reasoning strange, and the old man takes the opportunity to share a crucial detail he had forgotten to mention. The old man explains that House Portman now holds a hereditary barony, and the noble title will pass directly down to Eric. He emphasizes that the entire inheritance and noble rights belong solely to the young master, not to the wife who remained at the manor. The carriage pulls up to the gates of the grand estate under the radiant sun, which lights up the facade of the noble mansion. Stepping down from the carriage, Eric reasons that if she were only after money, she would have left the house over a year ago. The butler agrees, stating she could have claimed the assets as his proxy, but chose to stay entirely of her own accord. Intrigued by the revelation, the young man crosses his arms and asks if the servant knows the real reason behind her choice. Aldio admits the young woman is very reserved and a person of few words, explaining that they were never really that close. He adds that Tyria's natural nobility creates a certain distance, keeping the servants from pressing her into conversation. The young man comments that she seems difficult to deal with, while the servant calmly reminds him that this woman is his wife. Stroking the horse, the butler smiles serenely, saying that every marriage starts with this exact kind of awkward distance. Planting his cane on the stone steps, Eric heads up the mansion's entrance, focused on his own limping strides. Upon reaching the top of the staircase, he unexpectedly runs into Tyria holding a grocery bag right at the front door. Under the shadow of her straw hat, the lovely young woman blushes, faintly as she notices her husband's sudden approach. Carrying the bundle with delicate care, the noblewoman walks calmly through the hall, keeping her usual grace in every step. She warmly asks if he has returned from his outing, making the young man freeze in surprise at the unexpected greeting. Elric awkwardly returns the greeting, curiously asking when she made it back to the estate. With a shy look on her face, the noblewoman explains that she just got back from the wheat field while the carriage rests in the sunny courtyard. The young man politely suggests they head inside the mansion together, and Tyria accepts the invitation with a gentle nod. The couple walks up the grand interior staircase side by side, their footsteps echoing through the mansion's luxurious foyer. Glancing sideways, the young man kicks himself for dragging out the awkward conversation, cursing his big mouth for talking too much. Watching the young woman, he quietly admires how she naturally carries herself with such nobility, even when wearing such simple clothes. Looking at her delicate features, he wonders if she already possessed that striking charm 10 years ago. The sweet memory of Tyria in her wedding dress, her face blushing with embarrassment, comes rushing back vividly in the young man's mind. Realizing she's being stared at, the young woman turns around suddenly, making Ulrich flush bright red after getting caught red-handed. The young man stumbles on the stairs and nearly loses his balance, prompting Tyria to show concern as she asks if he is all right. He plants the tip of his cane firmly against the floor, managing to steady himself before taking a fall. With an awkward smile, Eric lies, saying he simply walked too much, while wondering how long she had been watching him. Walking up the steps beside her, the young man apologizes for being unable to carry the bag due to the injury in his leg. Tyria states that she is already used to the heavy chores, making the young man feel ashamed for having left her all alone. The noblewoman calmly explains that she grew accustomed to manual labor after learning the daily routines directly from her late father-in-law. The veteran acknowledges Hoven's strict demands, remarking that such a working style was very typical of his father. He recalls the patriarch personally inspecting the wheat fields, never making an exception for any task. He reflects that Hoven sold off his other businesses just to keep the wheat field, ultimately transferring everything to his young daughter-in-law. The two pause their walk in the hallway, stopping before the imposing portrait hanging on the main wall of the house. Taking advantage of the pause, Eric takes the initiative and gets his wife's attention to ask another question about her past. Looking at the painting of the deceased, the young man curiously asks what daily life was like between her and the former patriarch. Taria gives a vague answer, saying she only learned how to manage the business and hardly remembers anything else. With a thoughtful look, Eric asks directly if during that time his father ever mentioned anything about his son. In a sincere and straightforward tone, the young woman confirms that Hoven never brought up the subject, leaving the young man standing crestfallen beside her. He concludes that the union between such a cold man and a reserved woman must have limited their conversations strictly to business matters. The young veteran gazes at the solemn portrait of his father, understanding the emotional distance that had always lingered in that household. Tyria mentions that she needs to return to her duties, and Eric finds the statement strange, thinking she had already wrapped up her day. She explains that she still needs to review the reports, catching the young man off guard with the sheer volume of her responsibilities. Shocked to learn that the noblewoman works in the fields by day and analyzes paperwork by night, he questions her exhausting routine, politely saying her goodbyes. Tyria says they will see each other again at dinner as she heads toward the office. A wave of guilt washes over the young man as he sees his wife overburdened with duties that should have been his to carry. He reflects that it would be easier on his conscience if she showed some anger, yet the woman had never once uttered a complaint. Walking thoughtfully down the hallway with the help of his cane, he tries to figure out a way to ease all that remorse. A sudden crash of falling objects shatters the mansion's silence, putting the veteran on high alert as he looks to the side. The maid Marie is seen kneeling on the floor in a panic after dropping a box full of sealed letters, now scattered across the ground, desperate over the mess. The young maid scrambles to gather the mail while Elric steps closer to investigate. The young man kneels down to help her pick up the papers, curiously asking what all this paperwork is about. Marie explains that they are letters addressed to her mistress, and Eric holds one of the sealed envelopes. Examining it closely, with a friendly smile, he begins to comment on the large volume of mail received by the lady of the estate. Suddenly, his eyes widen in utter shock as he recognizes the sender prominently written on the back of the envelope. The letter from the noble Wibben family to their daughter reveals the shadow of greedy parents, pulling the strings of the young lady's fate. Sitting in the quiet study, Eric reads through the document carefully, his expression growing tense and somber. The message from Tyria's father orders her to stop waiting for her runaway husband and claim as much of the inheritance as she can. He reflects bitterly on how his father left Tyria nothing, even though the young woman worked for the family for 10 long years. Resting the letter on the desk, he concludes that even if she kept the entire fortune, it would still be fair compensation for her. With his head down before the desk, he wonders in anguish if Tyria only stayed at the mansion for the money. Covering part of his face with his hand, the young man tries to comprehend the true motive behind the noblewoman's exemplary conduct. Resting his chin in his hand, Eric sinks deep into thought, trying to connect the dots behind all of his wife's actions. Watching intently, the young man spots glaring contradictions in the idea that Tyria was acting solely out of financial greed. If she truly wanted the inheritance, she would not need to work herself to the bone and could have claimed all the assets a year ago. Sitting in the chair that once belonged to Hoven, the young man observes the documents on the desk, bathed in the sunlight streaming through the window. Opening the desk drawer, he discovers a massive stack of identical letters preserved in pristine condition. He realizes that every single demanding letter from the Wibben family was ignored and left completely unanswered by the the noblewoman. Noticing that her relatives went so far as to beg for a reply, he lets out a heavy sigh under the weight of such intense pressure. Deeply moved, the veteran understands that Tyria was protecting the inheritance of an absent husband who might never return. Realizing that not even Aldio knew about those letters, he understands that the young woman bore that entire burden all by herself. From the study window, he watches Tyria working among the golden fields, surrounded by the estate's other servants. He deeply laments the solitary, silent battle his wife endured throughout the past year without any support. Closing his eyes in sorrow, Eric questions why she chose to endure such a harsh life instead of simply walking away. Sitting before the luxurious vanity in her room, the noblewoman delicately gets ready for their upcoming meeting. With gentle motions, Tyria fastens a white ribbon into her long golden hair, paying careful attention to every detail of her appearance. Wearing a lovely blue dress, she gazes into the mirror while checking her makeup and the perfume bottles on the table. Marie watches her mistress with immense enthusiasm, clapping her hands excitedly over the long, awaited news that just arrived. The young maid celebrates ecstatically, pointing out that, for the first time, the young master took the initiative to ask for a private meeting. Even as she remembers the bath incident, Marie shyly admits that the butler Aldio is right about the future of the couple. The maid suggests that having an heir would be wonderful for the lady, leaving Tyria utterly baffled by the remark. Taking brisk, skipping steps across the room, the maid approaches the noblewoman with an amusing scheme in mind. She kneels on the floor and firmly grips the fabric of her mistress's dress to emphasize her outrageous ideas. Resting her hands on the lady's lap, the maid puts on a dramatic, pleading expression during their conversation. Marie blurts out that even if Eric is a pervert, it would be best for the two of them to get together and consummate the marriage. Screaming at the top of her lungs, the servant outrageously declares that the lady should have a baby with the young master as soon as possible. Tyria blushes softly with a sweet smile, while Marie drifts off into a daydream, imagining a whole bunch of children for the couple. Two firm knocks on the door cut the comedic moment short, making both mistress and maid turn toward the entrance in surprise. Outside, the butler Aldio asks if the lady is ready, and Tyria gracefully confirms that she will be out shortly. Walking side by side down the corridor, the noblewoman and the butler head toward the private room arranged for the talk with Eric. With her heart racing, Tyria wonders what the conversation will be about, remembering that this is the first time he has ever invited her. Aldio opens the doors to the room, announcing the lady's arrival, while the young veteran waits for her, seated at the table. Settled in the chair beside the sunlit window, Eric invites the woman in with a very polite and calm tone of voice. With flushed cheeks, the noblewoman enters the room, keeping her hands clasped in front of her with modesty and grace. Her heeled shoes step softly onto the carpet as the young man watches her approach while holding a teacup. He takes a sip of tea, trying to mask the tension building in his chest as the young woman takes her seat. The two sit across from each other at the small table bathed in the afternoon light, creating an intimate and private atmosphere. Elric places a sealed letter on the tablecloth, apologizing for opening the document without her proper permission. Resting his hand on the envelope, he directly asks if he may ask a few questions regarding the messages. Seeing the correspondence from her parents, Tyria's eyes widen, and she brings a hand to her chin, overcome with sudden shock. The young woman lowers her head, casting her face into shadow as she wrings her hands, visibly tense about the direction of the conversation. The young man sweats with anxiety, terrified that she might misunderstand everything and think he only returned for the inheritance money. He reveals he discovered that she ignored all the persistent letters the Wibben family sent throughout the past year. Elric asks why she defended the inheritance left in his name when there was no guarantee he would ever return. He emphasizes that she had every right to keep the assets for herself and waits for an honest explanation from his wife. The young man admits that to him, that woman had always felt like a distant stranger with whom he shared little contact in life. Because he felt so distant from her, her loyal act of protecting the family's entire fortune raised even more doubts in his mind. Staring at his wife's hands clutching her dress, he directly asks why she did not simply return to her homeland. With a serious expression and a steady voice, the young woman firmly speaks the surname Portman, breaking the room's silence. She rises to to her feet and firmly declares that her full name is now Tyria Wibben Portman, looking her husband straight in the eyes. Tyria emphasizes that she is not merely a lady of House Wibben, but rather the mistress and rightful owner of the noble House Portman, where she lives. Bowing with utmost elegance, she asks to be excused, stating that she still has many duties left to attend to. The young woman turns her back and walks toward the exit, leaving the young man alone at the table, completely stunned by her answer. Eric stares at the door she just walked through with wide eyes, unable to hide his astonishment at such a declaration. The noblewoman slips quietly through the door, while the young man remains seated, processing the words he just heard. In the hallway, Tyria clutches her chest and blushes furiously, recalling that the young man questioned why she protected the inheritance. With trembling lips and a burning face, the young woman whispers to herself the real reason behind all her dedication to the estate. Deeply moved and embarrassed, she admits in her heart that she acted that way solely because she is that man's lawful wife. Later in his study, Eric reflects on the notions of responsibility and duty that govern the young noblewoman's conduct. The memory of the sheer conviction with which Tyria claimed to belong to the Portman family echoes loudly in the young man's thoughts. With a swift, sharp motion, he plunges the sharp knife into the wooden desk, releasing his built-up tension. Gazing at the shining reflection on the blade, he wonders if the duty of a noble wife was truly the only motivation behind that choice. Tyria's selfless dedication to fulfilling her duties reminds the veteran of someone very important from his past. The figure of the noble silver-haired knight, Elvers Graham, surfaces in his mind, bringing back memories of camaraderie. He recalls when he first met Elvers Graham on the battlefield, maintaining a professional dynamic of employer and mercenary. Although they won the war with few casualties, the nobleman ended up losing the use of his legs and was confined to a wheelchair. Elvers used to say that fighting in the war was his noble duty, necessary to set an example for all the citizens. To that silver-haired warrior, the battlefield was simply the ideal stage to honor his responsibilities. Alaric remembers questioning the nobleman for risking his life when he was merely the son of a concubine of humble origins. In good humor, the man replied that being half noble, he fulfilled half his duty by sacrificing half of his own body. Just as he had planned, Elvers gave up the sword to live in luxury, eventually marrying a few years after his retirement. The pointed blade remains stuck in the wood of the desk, catching the light as the young man meditates in silence. He yanks the knife from the furniture with a firm pull, repeating to himself the true meaning behind the words duty and honor. The veteran acknowledges that he cannot erase Tyria's 10 years of sacrifice, but he resolves to do everything within his power. Knowing that the demanding letters from the Wibben family will not stop, he concludes that a new message is bound to arrive soon. He suspects that his wife's relatives only demand answers by mail because they actually lack the means to visit her in person. The young man knows that even if he asks directly, the young woman will not reveal her feelings due to her ever-reserved nature. The carriage wheels spin swiftly along the road as Eric follows a straightforward plan to uncover the whole truth. The imposing and luxurious Wibben estate stands tall against the blue sky, showcasing lavish and extravagant architecture. Standing before the ornate iron gate, the young veteran observes the noble residence with a keen and thoughtful gaze. Leaning on his cane, he decides on a frontal assault, as it was the best strategy he learned on the battlefield. From the upper floor window, the nobles of House Wibben watch the unexpected arrival of the son-in-law who has just stepped out of the carriage. The lord and lady walk down the corridor, mocking the young man's commoner roots, and assuming he only returned for the inheritance. With a greedy, intense expression, the nobleman fears that the young master's return threatens their plans to seize the estate. The woman conceals a wicked smirk behind her golden fan as she glides down the hallway in her red dress. The aristocratic couple stride purposefully toward the drawing room, plotting a way to intimidate their unwelcome guest. The man with the goatee rants, calling Elric a greedy commoner who cares for nothing but money and material wealth. Tyria's mother bitterly complains about her daughter's 10 wasted years, reminding him how expensive it was to raise the young noblewoman. With an expression consumed by pure avarice, the man clenches his jaw, obsessed with the fortune left behind by the late Hoven. They enter the hall, agreeing to demand all the inheritance money as compensation for their daughter being abandoned. The patriarch's hand grips the golden handle, firmly pushing the parlor door open to confront the young man once and for all. Dressed in an elegant suit and holding his cane, Elric appears at the entrance of the room with an exceptionally serene demeanor. The young man formally introduces himself as Eric Portman and offers a polite bow, apologizing for the long delay. Sitting at the table, the in-laws respond sarcastically, pointing out how difficult it has been to see him after a whole decade of absence. Elric takes a seat opposite the couple and cuts straight to the chase, stating that he read the letter they sent to his mansion. The man feigns paternal concern, claiming he only wrote because he felt sorry for his daughter, who spent 10 years without a husband. He accuses the young man of ingratitude for abandoning his wife after the nobility elevated the Portman family's commoner status. With a mocking smirk, the Lord belittles the young man's humble origins and his limp, questioning his ability to manage anything. He points out that Tyria was the one who took care of everything and decides to speak plainly, assuming the young man is not very bright. The nobleman shamelessly demands the surrender of the entire inheritance as fair payment for the time his daughter was left neglected. Resting his chin on his hand, the man calls Eric shameless, claiming he would never know how to put the money to good use. The woman hides her laughter behind her fan and disparages the young man's capabilities, harping on her daughter's lonely suffering. The shadows of greed envelop the aristocratic couple, as both cynically reaffirm their right to claim the fortune. With deep disgust written all over his face, Eric realizes that all this smooth talk is merely a scheme to seize his wealth. With a red glint in his eyes, he looks at his in-laws, fully grasping the plot woven against the inheritance left by his father. The young man concludes with outrage that these shameless parents are trying to sell their own daughter all over again in exchange for gold. Leaning forward, Elric clenches his fists on the table, finding it utterly repulsive to listen to such filth coming from these nobles. Maintaining an icy composure, the veteran closes his eyes for a second and begins his response in an extremely courteous tone. He politely apologizes for not bringing Tyria along, explaining that his wife was far too busy with household duties. The man slams his hand on the table in fury and yells at him not to change the subject, demanding they get back to the inheritance money. The father-in-law fumes, accusing the young man of greed and questioning whether it is fair for him to keep the assets after being gone for 10 years. Covering his face with one hand, Eric lets out a mocking laugh upon hearing the accusation of greed coming from that man. With a cold, intimidating glare, the young man looks the Lord in the eye and coldly asks what he will do if he actually decides to be greedy. Elric stares down the frightened nobleman and coldly warns that he will make sure to indulge in every bit of the greed he was accused of. Staring at his father-in-law with an icy calm, Eric asks what he plans to do, mocking the man's sudden silence. The Lord's hand trembles over the table as the young man bluntly asks if his arrogant ranting is finally over. Overcome with a fit of rage and humiliation, the nobleman jumps up, screaming that his son-in-law is insolent beyond measure. With a piercing gaze, Eric coldly states that the man finally seems to understand just how disadvantaged he truly is. He recalls that in war, he learned that extreme reactions and pointless displays of anger do nothing to change the reality of a fight. His memories of combat remind him that the weight of one's actions in battle matters little when the final outcome remains unchanged. The young man sternly warns that his father-in-law had better shut his mouth if he still wants to keep receiving his allowance from the Portman family. With an ironic smile, he points out the sheer absurdity of someone with zero claim to the inheritance making so many demands. Turning his back on the aristocrats, he scoffs in contempt, stating that the only truly greedy ones in the room are them. The Lord roars in desperation from behind the table, threatening to come to the mansion and destroy the young man for such an insult. At the exit door, Elric mocks the threat, saying with disdain that he will eagerly await whatever move the man decides to make. The carriage heads back along the road, shaded by the tree canopies under the soft afternoon light. Inside the vehicle, the young man covers his face with his hand and lets out an exhausted sigh. Crushed by a heavy weight on his conscience, he reproaches himself in silence, wondering if he is truly any different from those petty nobles, or just another sinner in Tyria's life. Recalling his aggressive demeanor during the argument, he bitterly questions whether he acted out of honor or pure arrogance. Clasping his cane on the seat, he worries he said all those things just to feed a hollow sense of superiority. He guiltily admits that the thrill of putting his laws in their place gave him a strange rush. Rather than steering compassion for his wife, the memory of Hoven's stern demand resurfaces in his mind, insisting that he pay the price for his entire upbringing in the past. Shaken, Eric acknowledges that deep down in his soul, he had been just as selfish and callous as the very father he despised so much. The coachman suddenly pulls the reins, bringing the vehicle to an abrupt halt in the middle of the dirt road. Feeling suddenly ill, the veteran rests his hand against the side of the carriage as he fights off a violent wave of nausea. He scrambles out of the carriage and throws up against the wooden frame, gasping for air amidst a crushing crisis of conscience. Breathless and covered in a cold sweat, the young man stammers in despair, coming to terms with who he truly is. Leaning against the carriage in front of the wheat field, he grieves in silence, bitterly concluding that he is a terrible human being. Suddenly, he looks up with bloodshot eyes, surprised to spot something unexpected catching his attention in the middle of the field. In the distance and under the bright sunlight, he spots Taria working peacefully, a white kerchief tied around her head. The young lady walks among the golden stalks, carrying a calm and devoted expression as she tends to her chores in the field. Whispering his wife's name with deep emotion, the young man feels as his chest tighten with remorse as he gazes upon the scene. Driven by an uncontrollable sense of urgency, he begins running across the dirt ground toward the noblewoman in the middle of the wheat field. Running without a care for the pain, he thinks in anguish about all the trials and hardships the young woman had to endure alone. He reflects that her greedy parents, the late patriarch, and he himself had brought nothing but suffering to that noblewoman's life. The servants watch in shock as the young master races desperately across the field, completely disregarding his exhaustion and his injured limp. Tyria slowly turns around upon hearing the rushed footsteps, revealing a calm and serene gaze amidst the golden crops. Suddenly reaching his wife, Eric grasps her hands with a mix of firmness and desperation, wanting to pour out all his anguish. Startled by the sudden touch, the noblewoman blinks in bewilderment and respectfully addresses him as the patriarch. Not understanding what happened, bowing before her in the middle of the field, the young man begins to speak, his voice choking with raw emotion and remorse. He asks for forgiveness with an open heart for abandoning her for 10 years and for making selfish excuses for his flight. Lowering his head deeply over the young woman's hands, he laments all the pain and humiliation she had to face. Taria is left speechless and wide-eyed as she hears her husband's shoulder all the blame for the difficult past she had to endure. In a sweet childhood memory, young Eric brandishes a wooden stick to chase away wild dogs and protect the girl. The little boy turns to the girl with the parasol, kindly asking if she is all right, or if she was bitten by the beasts. Little Tyria says she is fine, but looks in shock at the blood trickling down the scraped leg of her young savior. The boy complains in frustration about the beast's bite, which left a nasty mark on his leg during the scuffle. Shyly, the little girl softly asks him to come with her to a safe spot so she can treat him. As she bandages the wound, Eric introduces himself proudly, saying he only saved her because they were on his family's land. Sitting on the grass, he asks if she has always been this quiet and brags that he will become a great royal knight in the future. The girl finishes the bandage in silence, her cheeks blushing as she listens intently to the boy's bold promises. Opening her parasol, she tells him she finished the bandage, and young Eric sheepishly thanks her, admiring the neat wrap. He praises the girl's skill, saying she looks just like a noble lady, and asks curiously where she learned to tend to wounds. The little girl shyly whispers that she learned it from her nanny, and the boy asks out loud for her to speak up a bit Little Tyria's cheeks flush with embarrassment as she holds her parasol under the boy's watchful eye. Young Eric scolds her, saying that being so shy will make it impossible for her to ever find a husband. He blushes awkwardly and adds that he would make her his bride once he became a royal knight, catching her completely off guard. Her heart racing, young Tyria's eyes widen with delight, completely charmed by such an unexpected promise. Embarrassed by her silence, the boy snaps angrily, insisting he only wants her around for her medical skills. The girl walks away in silence while the boy throws a tantrum, yelling that one day she'll be begging to marry him. Years later, Tyria gently holds Eric's childhood portrait, fondly recalling that distant promise. Looking at the picture, she smiles warmly, realizing that even though he never became a knight, destiny brought them back together. As evening falls, the head housekeeper instructs Marie to prepare a special spread of refreshments for the couple's private meeting in the manor. Rhonda and the noble lady walk down the softly lit hallway toward the study, where the young master is patiently waiting. Recalling her husband's serious expression, Tyria walks in silence, trying to guess what this meeting could possibly be about. Sweating lightly with nerves, she wonders what could have prompted him to call her in for a private conversation. The maid knocks on the door and respectfully announces her mistress's arrival to begin the long-awaited meeting between husband and wife. Settling into the sitting room, Eric and Tyria sit across from each other, maintaining a formal and rather reserved distance. In a soft voice, the young lady breaks the silence, asking him to share whatever was important enough to bring her there. The young man nods with a serious look, explaining that he called her in to share something that has been weighing heavily on his chest. Looking directly into his wife's eyes, he sincerely offers a deep apology for everything he has done. Surprised and confused by his sudden change in attitude, the noblewoman brings a hand to her lips and asks what he could possibly be apologizing for. He clarifies that he wants to ask her forgiveness for abandoning her on their wedding day and running away from his responsibilities. The young man admits he was reckless and foolish in his youth, failing to consider the harsh consequences his actions would bring upon her life. He laments the pain and difficult times she had to endure completely alone, reaffirming his sincere desire to make amends. With eyes full of humility, Eric asks if she could find it in her heart to accept his long overdue apology. Tyria addresses him as the family head and calmly replies that he has no reason at all to apologize to her. She explains that she has never held a grudge against anyone and that staying at the Portman estate was entirely her own choice. Realizing that guilt is still tormenting the young man's heart, the noblewoman decides to give in so he can finally find peace of mind. With a sweet smile and flushed cheeks, she tenderly tells him that she accepts his apology, catching him completely by surprise. Feeling a massive wave of relief wash over his chest, the young man breaks into a warm, genuine smile at his wife's generosity. He thanks her with pure joy in his eyes, affectionately addressing her as my lady for granting him his long-awaited forgiveness. The two walk side by side down the manor corridor as the young master takes slow, steady steps supported by his cane. Tyria asks if he can manage the walk, and the veteran assures her everything is fine, smoothly changing the subject. Eric apologizes for taking up her precious time, but she gently asks him not to talk like that. The young lady hesitates and stops in the middle of the hallway, addressing him as family head to express a desire she had kept hidden inside. With her cheeks burning red from embarrassment, she shyly asks if he could call her by a different name instead of just my lady. In an almost inaudible, bashful whisper, the noblewoman tries to utter the word wife before her stunned husband. Unable to catch her quiet murmur, Eric leans in close and asks, confused, if she could repeat what she just said. Suddenly, Marie and the butler Aldio barge through the door, loudly announcing tea time and completely ruining the moment. Startled by the noisy entrance, the young man loses his balance with his cane and clumsily stumbles forward. He falls with all his weight right on top of Tyria, pinning her to the floor in an extremely intimate and utterly awkward position. Audio teases them by asking if they are already working on an hair, while Marie shrieks in pure panic at the compromising sight. With his face burning bright red, Eric frantically tries to get up, yelling that it was nothing more than an unfortunate accident. The butler covers Marie's eyes, jokingly saying they should pretend they saw nothing, while the maid wails in total scandal. The old man winks, promising to make sure the servants give the couple some privacy, which only annoys the young master further. Tyria calls out to her husband from the floor, and Eric throws his hands up in sheer distress, trying to apologize through the chaos. Lying beneath him with flushed cheeks, she timidly asks him to get off her, and the flustered young man stammers another apology. Olio closes the door with a mischievous grin, wishing them a lovely time alone. Much to Elric's utter horror, the young man's furious shout echoes into the starry night over the estate as he desperately insists that it was all a huge misunderstanding. The next morning, bright rays of sunlight pour into the master bedroom, carrying the gentle sound of chirping birds through the window. Rhonda knocks on the door with a warm smile, politely asking if the young master is awake to start the new day. Dressed in a comfortable white shirt, Eric adjusts his collar and returns the servant's greeting with a relaxed look on his face. The housekeeper notices his unusually cheerful mood and curiously hints whether something special happened the night before. She follows up with a sly smile, teasing if his bright mood might have something to do with the arrival of a future heir. The young man blushes and angrily barks back that Aldio's rumors are completely made up, while the maid playfully acts disappointed. Rhonda's tone turns serious as she warns him that what happened the night before shouldn't simply be brushed aside. Turning to him with a stern gaze, the head housekeeper asks if he truly doesn't understand the gravity of the situation. She reminds him of Taria's 10 years of loneliness and firmly advises the young master never to leave her all alone again. In the neighboring bedroom, the morning light shines down on the bed where Tyria rests, lovingly hugging her husband's old portrait. Waking up with a peaceful expression, the young noblewoman is surprised to find herself feeling so much more energetic and refreshed this morning. Gently caressing the picture frame, she silently whispers a good morning, addressing Elric by his respectful title of family head. Setting the portrait on her nightstand, she feels a flutter of joy, realizing that yesterday's moments brought her just a little closer to her husband. Stretching with a wide smile, she contemplates the idea of greeting the young master in person every single morning. The sun shines brightly over the vast wheat fields, marking the start of another productive day across the noble estate. The couple eats breakfast seated at opposite ends of the long dining table, sharing a quiet and peaceful atmosphere. The delicate clinking of silverware on the plates breaks the quiet room as the morning meal is served to the couple. Tyria calmly enjoys her food, wearing a soft, peaceful expression in the bright light pouring through the window. The young man sweats nervously, finding the silence awkward, and wonders if the previous night's incident caused all this tension. The memory of tumbling right on top of Tyria flashes through his mind, making the veteran turn bright red at the table. Hearing his wife suddenly call his name, Elric jumps in surprise and stammers back, asking what she needs. With rosy cheeks, the noblewoman gathers her courage and shyly asks if he would like to accompany her on an outing today. Taken aback by the unexpected invitation, the young man looks up with his crimson eyes and repeats the question, trying to process the offer. Feeling shy, Tyria explains that she needs to inspect the estate grounds for the harvest festival and suggests they go together. Recalling the importance of the annual festival, Eric eases up and shows genuine interest in checking on the lands. With a warm, gentle smile, the young man instantly accepts the invitation, confirming he'd be glad to keep his wife company. The young lady lets out a bashful sigh and beams with a lovely smile, thrilled to have her husband by her side for the day. In the dressing room, the maids adjust the noblewoman's outfit while Marie worriedly asks if the dress feels too tight. Tyria assures her that the blue gown is plenty comfortable as the staff carefully and diligently smooth out her skirt. Rhonda tells Marie to keep attending to their mistress and mentions that she will head over to the young master's chambers to assist him. Stepping into the room, the head housekeeper smiles brightly, assuming he's already dressed, but he tells her he doesn't need any help. Her smile vanishes in an instant the moment she lays eyes on the war veteran's bizarre choice of clothing. Eric stands there wearing rugged mercenary clothes and a wide-brimmed hat, insisting that his outfit is practical for an outing. Outraged, Rhonda grabs him by the arm, reminding him this is an official inspection and not a battlefield, ordering him to change immediately. The housekeeper firmly shuts the bedroom doors, determined to dress the young master with the dignity he rightfully deserves. The young man tries to pull away from her grip, pleading with her to let him change on his own as he gets dragged back inside. Shoving him onto a chair, the servant authoritatively commands him to sit down so she can start overhauling his look, adjusting her white gloves. She declares that a nobleman should wear proper attire and insists she will pick out his entire outfit. With quick, practiced motions, she snatches off his hat and rugged vest, completely ignoring every single one of his protests. Eric clutches his shirt, laughing awkwardly as he begs her to just pick out the clothes and leave the room. Rhonda mocks his embarrassment, reminding him she's looked after him since he was a little boy running around the mansion without clothes. The young man screams in utter humiliation, but the devoted servant grabs his collar, determined to strip him right then and there. With one forceful yank, she tears open his shirt, prompting the battle-hardened veteran to let out a startled yelp at the sudden invasion. The housekeeper's eyes widen, and she covers her mouth in sheer horror upon seeing the true condition of the young master's body. Elric's muscular chest and torso are covered in countless deep, jagged scars from his brutal days on the battlefield, her voice breaking and tears welling up in her eyes. Rhonda's hands tremble as she stares in disbelief at so many marks of suffering. Pulling his shirt closed over his chest, the young man offers an awkward smile, explaining that this was why he wanted to dress alone. In tears, the devoted servant steps forward in distress and asks what on earth happened to him during all those long years away. Gently resting his hand over hers on his cheek, Eric apologizes and promises he will explain everything when the time is right. Holding Rhonda's gloved hands, he warmly asks her to keep his scars a secret from his wife. Deeply moved by his request, the housekeeper turns her head and wipes away a tear, heartbroken over the young man's painful past. Sniffling, she agrees to his request and declares that from now on, she will be the only one allowed to help him get dressed on the estate. In the sunlit courtyard, Aldia waits beside the elegant carriage, ready for the couple's departure to the inspection. Dressed in an impeccable blue noble suit complete with a neat cravat, Eric smiles, looking confident and sharp in his new appearance. Aldio praises Elric's sharp look and jokes that he was worried the Lord might show up looking like a bandit and scare his wife away. Eric admits he almost walked out terribly dressed until Rhonda stepped in, while Aldio nods in approval of the housekeeper's great taste. Tyria approaches, thanking the family head for his patience, prompting both the young man and the butler to turn around in curiosity. Looking stunning as she steps up with her maids, Tyria shyly asks Elric how she looks for their very first outing together. Flushed red and utterly flustered, Eric stammers awkwardly as he tells her she looks truly beautiful. Tyria offers a beaming smile in return, while Rhonda lets out a soft sigh at the young master, choosing to stay quiet since the lady looks so happy. Eric invites his wife to head out, and Tyria responds warmly as the two walk side by side toward the royal carriage. The scene shifts to the entrance of the local market, where a villager calls out to his friend upon spotting someone special arriving. Word of Elric's return spreads like wildfire among the surprised townsfolk throughout the bustling Portman market. The couple walks through the streets together, and Eric warmly greets the people, asking how everyone has been during his years away. A wooden sign painted with bread and fish marks the entrance to the village's bustling food and provisions district. A local shopkeeper beams with a massive smile, asking in disbelief if the handsome young man before her is truly Eric Portman. Elric warmly greets Aunt Michelle, and the elderly woman tears up seeing how much that little boy has grown into a fine man. Wooden signs point the way toward the local inn and various commercial shops scattered around the area. A purple-haired local spots the young noble from afar and excitedly chatters about his long-awaited return to the territory. Another villager's eyes go wide in shock before breaking into a joyful grin, realizing that the rightful heir has truly come home. His old friends ask about his limp, but Elric brushes it off, awkwardly claiming it was just a minor scratch. A sudden shout calling for Boss Eric rings across the square, making the young master and the surrounding crowd turn around in surprise. Elric instantly recognizes his childhood friend Bart, who rushes over with pure joy, ecstatically celebrating his reunion with his old boss. The two friends seal their reunion with a firm, warm-form clasp, showing the unbreakable bond they share. They embrace happily as Elric remarks that Bart hasn't changed a bit, while his friend jokes that he barely recognized him all grown up. Bart awkwardly turns to greet Taria, who responds with refined grace. Asking how he has been holding up, Bart points excitedly, inviting Elric to stop by his place during the celebration so they can share a few drinks and catch up. Rising a fist with a confident grin, Elric accepts the invitation and agrees to catch up with his old buddy later on. Bart waves his hand high in the air as he watches the couple continue their walk through the sunlit streets of the Portman territory. Watching the two walk away, Bart smiles and muses that while he never saw this marriage coming, they really do make a great pair. The carriage rolls smoothly along the dirt road, flanked by golden fields bathed in the warm amber glow of the setting sun. Inside the carriage, Eric quietly observes his wife, who is completely absorbed in reading a book during the ride. The young man glances at the illustrated cover, noticing with curiosity that it is a detailed botanical guide on plants. With his cheeks slightly flushed, the young man breaks the quiet, softly calling out to his wife to start a conversation. Tyria lowers the book onto her lap and shyly looks up, answering her husband's call with gentle composure and respect. Elric expresses his desire to help run the estate and bashfully asks if she would be willing to teach him how to manage everything. He acknowledges all the hard work she carried out alone up until now, stating that he wants to step up and shoulder his duties as family head. The young man asks for her thoughts, while Tyria hides her blushing face behind her book, deeply moved by his words. Her heart pounding, the young lady glances at her husband from behind the pages, utterly charmed by how dependable he has become. The noblewoman gently closes the book, resting it on her lap as she prepares to give her answer to the veteran's request. Looking her husband straight in the eyes, Tyria asks if she's allowed to be strict with his lessons, just like the previous lord taught her. Eric lets out a bashful chuckle, with a hand on his chest, sincerely telling her to be as strict as she needs to be. Back in the carriage, Eric asks about his father's lessons, and Tyria proudly replies that she was a quick learner who never got scolded once. The scene cuts to the dead of night, revealing the bustling exterior of a tavern near the border with Chever. Inside, several patrons are drinking and chatting across scattered tables, filling the room with a rowdy atmosphere. Heavy footsteps echo at the entrance as an imposing figure appears, loudly ordering every fool inside to listen up. The bartender behind the counter stops wiping a glass and raises his eyebrows, intrigued by the harsh, commanding voice. Standing by the doorway, a red-haired young woman in a dark cloak firmly declares that she won't ask twice. With a sharp, piercing glare, the scarlet-haired girl demands to know where the demon swordsman of Kasha is hiding. An exterior shot of the grand estate stands out against the golden sunset sky, showcasing its noble architecture. A quill glides smoothly across the parchment as stacks of documents and books pile up on the study desk inside the manor. Elric notices the mountain of paperwork and asks if she always deals with this much, while Tyria explains it only gets this bad during peak season. Pausing her writing, the young lady hesitates and calls for the family head, who immediately turns his attention to her. With flushed cheeks, Tyria asks if he would be willing to give a speech at the festival to celebrate his long-awaited return. Elric gives a surprised smile at the suggestion, asking if she truly means a commemorative speech for the Harvest Festival. In his war memories, commanders used to bellow fierce battle cries just to drive soldiers straight into bloody slaughter. The young man recalls his days as a Kasha mercenary, when he ignored all the speeches while others roared for blood. He remembers that he was never in a leadership position to give speeches, nor did he ever have any desire to do so. With his face splattered in blood, the young man recalls the real reason he threw himself aimlessly into those brutal battlefields. He charged straight into danger solely to find a target upon which to unleash the boiling fury burning in his soul. He tore through enemy soldiers with chilling apathy, spraying blood across the ground as he cut a path through the battlefield. He slaughtered his foes like a savage beast, leaving a trail of lifeless bodies with each precise, deadly strike of his blade. Breathing heavily with blood dripping down his face, he concludes that someone with a bloody past like his has no business giving speeches. Taria's voice calling for the family head snaps him back to reality, and Eric quickly apologizes, claiming he just got lost in thought for a second. The young man suggests an alternative, proposing that his wife deliver the speech while he proudly stands right by her side. The noblewoman agrees to his suggestion and, with a lovely smile, promises to take charge of addressing the crowd at the grand festival. Tyria happily thinks to herself that simply having her husband beside her during this year's celebrations is more than enough. Standing before the massive crowd gathered in the village square, Taria thanks all the residents for their hard work throughout the year. Dressed in an elegant red gown, the noblewoman raises her voice with excitement, inviting everyone to enjoy the grand festival to the fullest. The villagers erupt in wild cheers, raising their arms and shouting in celebration at the lady's warm, welcoming words. Tenderly taking Elric's hand, Tyria shyly invites him to take a stroll and explore the festival stalls together. The locals notice the noble couple approaching and excitedly chatter amongst themselves. Thrilled to see the two walking hand in hand, a warm, friendly woman walks up, offering a plate of food so the young lady can sample the festival's best cooking. A local man holds out a frothing mug of ale, cheerfully inviting the young master to drink and celebrate alongside everyone. Holding the food and drink, the couple thanks the villagers for their warmth and wishes everyone a wonderful harvest celebration. Looking toward one of the festival attractions, Tyria's golden eyes widen in absolute awe at the performance before her, excitedly tugging on his arm. The young lady points eagerly, urging him to look at the act currently on stage. Performers in colorful costumes announce a rare exhibition of court jester skills to the gathered crowd. Gripping the hilt of a blade firmly, the performer dramatically announces that he will perform the dangerous art of sword swallowing. The man slowly slides the blade down his throat, leaving the noblewoman completely jaw-dropped while her husband calmly watches on. The dangerous trick is pulled off without a hitch, and the young lady claps enthusiastically, utterly amazed by the performer's skill. Noticing her husband's flat, unimpressed expression, the young lady stops clapping and glances at him with curious eyes. Tyria asks if he didn't find it incredible, and Eric chuckles awkwardly, replying that he's seen far too many people swallow swords during the war. Walking arm in arm through the festival tents, the couple arrives at a target shooting stall featuring throwing knives. The stall owner and the local kids excitedly call out to the Lord, encouraging him to try his luck at the knife-throwing game. The merchant points to the apples hanging from the wooden board, promising a great reward if he can hit the bullseye. Elric hesitates, mentioning it has been quite a while since he threw a knife, but the eager kids beg to see his skills in action. Holding his arm with a gentle smile, Tyria encourages him to give it a shot since the children are so excited to watch. Swayed by his wife's sweet request, the young man blushes awkwardly and steps up to the throwing line, picking up the knives. The vendor playfully tells the young lord not to be nervous, while Auric's gaze instantly sharpens with lethal focus. Before the shopkeeper can even finish his sentence, the young man hurls 3 blades in the blink of an eye, pinning every single apple dead center. The vendor stands frozen in pure shock at the unreal accuracy, while the children jump and scream in wild excitement over the incredible throw. With flushed cheeks and sparkling eyes, Tyria is left thoroughly amazed by her husband's unbelievable skill. Breaking into a cold sweat at everyone's stunned silence, Eric nervously wonders if he should have missed on purpose. Laughing awkwardly, he tries to brush it off as beginner's luck and shyly asks his wife if he ended up embarrassing himself. Tyria clasps her hands in sheer admiration, declaring he looked just like a royal knight. While the young man tries to play it down, Elric smiles with relief seeing how happy she is, glad to see that the festive atmosphere is doing her so much good. The stall owner steps forward holding the victory prize wrapped neatly in straw, cordially presenting it to the young lord. With a wide smile, the man explains that this bundle of eggs was personally prepared by the local merchants' guild. Elric politely declines the prize and asks to give it to the children instead, making the kids erupt into joyful cheers. With a sweet look and rosy cheeks, Tyria admires her husband's generous gesture, praising the incredible kindness in his heart. Elric smiles and explains that it reminded him of his childhood, when he won the exact same prize and was thrilled to find a golden egg inside. Tyria bursts into laughter, recalling how he traded that golden egg for Hyman's oversized helmet, which ended up looking like a bucket on his head. Elric looks at her in surprise and asks how she could possibly know that old story, making the young noblewoman instantly freeze and turn pale. Tyria tries to hide her nervousness, laughing awkwardly as she says he was quite famous in the village because of the troublemaker rumors. With her hand over her chest, the young woman blushes deeply, secretly thinking she would never have the courage to reveal the truth to her husband. She remembers being a child and watching him in secret, holding a deep desire to become his bride. Elric's calm voice, calling out to the noblewoman, interrupts her daydreaming, bringing her attention back to the event. Reaching out with a warm smile at dusk, the young man invites his partner to head over to the central square together, holding her husband's hand with both of hers. Tyria flashes a radiant smile and accepts the invitation with immense joy. Under the starry night sky, a man raises a lit torch, officially announcing the start of the village's lighting ceremony. Bart takes over hosting with the torch, warmly greeting the noble couple and enthusiastically praising the lady's beauty. Elric smiles, calling his friend a flatterer, while Tyria's face turns bright red amid the crowd's laughter and applause. Gesturing excitedly before the crowd, the young man asks for everyone's attention to make a wish for the land's prosperity. Bart suddenly announces a kissing ceremony between the nobles, catching the couple completely off guard in the middle of the square. Utterly embarrassed, the two exchange quick glances, their faces flushed red from the sheer surprise of the situation. With wide eyes and a racing heart, Tyria panics at the thought of kissing her husband right there in public. Excitement takes over the entire crowd as the host hypes up the festive mood even further under the night sky. Bart keeps shouting to fire up the crowd, claiming that this act will bring blessings of prosperity to their lands. The young man once again loudly demands a kiss from the noble couple, drawing cheers of excitement from the gathered audience. Under the collective pressure, the couple stares at each other awkwardly, feeling the tension and shyness grow by the second. Bart mocks the Lord for taking so long, telling him to hurry up, while Elric grits his teeth, annoyed by his friend's audacity. Raising his arms, the young man rallies everyone to shout in unison to give the embarrassed patriarch the courage he needs. The crowd joins the chant, screaming non-stop for them to kiss, leaving both the young man and the noblewoman even more flustered. Elric steps closer to her, politely asking for a brief moment, while Tyria looks at him confused, unsure of what he intends to do. Suddenly, the young man firmly grabs his wife by the waist and dips her back in a graceful, noble motion. Feeling her husband's breath so close, the noblewoman widens her golden eyes and blushes intensely at the intimate contact. Elric whispers an apology, gently suggesting they play along with the festival's gimmick to calm the crowd down. Tyria closes her eyes with a soft smile, accepting the patriarch's proposal, but adds that she never does anything halfway. Cupping Elric's face, the noblewoman pulls him in and seals their lips in a passionate kiss, catching the veteran completely by surprise. The massive bonfire blazes high in the background as the villagers cheer and shout in pure euphoria, witnessing the passionate kiss. Under the radiant moonlight, the voices of the village echo, wishing eternal love to the couple and everlasting prosperity to the lands. Later, in the quiet of the night, muffled, hysterical screams of pure embarrassment echo through the windows of the grand estate. In her chambers, Tyria kneels on the bed and buries her head into her pillow, screaming at the top of her lungs from sheer mortification. The noblewoman gasps for breath, her cheeks on fire and eyes tearing up in utter shock at her own boldness. Remembering the fiery kiss, she covers her burning face, wondering how on earth she found the courage to do that to him. Fearing that her husband might think she's weird, the young noblewoman stays awake all night long, unable to catch a wink of sleep. In the next room, the young man touches his lips with a racing heart, lying in bed, completely unable to stop thinking about the kiss. The story cuts to the lavish mansion of the White Group, located in the Kingdom of Arman, where a golden flag stands out. Inside the elegant office, a nobleman with glasses and a green ascot sips hot tea from a fine porcelain cup. The silver-haired secretary enters the room and reports to Chairman White that the Imperial Army has breached the borders. The woman explains that the local forces collapsed without Kasha's presence, while the leader calmly sets his teacup on the desk. Duke Edward White smiles shrewdly, praising the successful plan of targeting the legendary mercenary to weaken them. Advisor Agnes Blackmere stands quietly beside the masked woman, listening intently to her superior's orders. Agnes asks worriedly if it's really wise to let the territories fall, given their heavy shares in the financial group. The Lord explains that the war has already lasted 7 years, and the territories only held out this long thanks to funds in Kasha. Taking another sip of his drink, the Duke coldly concludes that those nations have completely lost the ability to pay off their debt. He plans to rescue key figures to recover the shares before the regions inevitably collapse. Without the swordsman pouring more tea into her leader's cup, the silver-haired secretary coldly points out just how cunning and calculating he is. The nobleman reacts defensively to the maid's remark, insisting he's merely doing his duty as a noble of Arman. Shifting the focus of the conversation, Agnes turns serious and asks if it's truly safe to let the man named Kasha live in peace. With a smug grin, the chairman calmly replies that he is no longer Kasha, but rather Eric Portman. The woman warns him of possible revenge, but the leader breaks into a cold sweat, recalling that failing to kill him would be suicide. Edward recalls with awe how the warrior blocked a supersonic bullet with a mana shield just to protect his own knee. Duke White claims it would be a waste to kill him, and Agnes asks, intrigued, what he means by those words. Edward explains that Eric is a true mercenary and asks his secretary if she knows the crucial difference between the two. The nobleman points out that the young man doesn't act solely for self-gain, emphasizing that this is a rare trait for a real mercenary. Clasping his hands with a calculating smile, the chairman declares that he intends to keep the young man dancing in the palm of his hand. With the swordsman gone, the war will hit a stalemate, and several kingdoms will come knocking on the White Group's door for loans. Agnes catches on to his reasoning, realizing that Kasha will serve as the counterweight for them to profit even more from the balanced conflict. Edward's eyes gleam behind his glasses, utterly fascinated by how quickly his brilliant advisor figured out the plan. The young man leaps out of his chair in pure excitement, praising the woman's intellect and gushing about how much he loves her sharp mind. Spreading his arms, the chairman rushes forward eagerly to hug her, while Aang stares back with total coldness and indifference. With a clean, direct strike, the secretary punches her boss right in the face, leaving him drooling in pain with his hair a complete mess. Agnes adjusts her gloves, warning him that she won't go easy just because he's young, while the Lord writhes in pain on the floor. Under the bright morning sunlight, the Portman family's lavish estate stands tall with its elegant facade against the clear blue sky. In front of the large mirror, Rhonda adjusts the young man's formal clothes, and he calmly confirms that the outfit fits very comfortably. Just as Eric tries to bring up an earlier topic, Tyria enters the room, causing both the housekeeper and the young man to freeze. Seeing the young master, the noblewoman's cheeks burn with embarrassment, and she stammers shyly as she addresses him by his title. With his heart racing, Eric also blushes deeply and responds bashfully, remembering the kiss they shared, sensing the tense atmosphere and awkwardness between the nobles. The housekeeper smiles mischievously, getting ready to leave them alone. The housekeeper quickly excuses herself from the room, leaving the couple alone in that intensely awkward atmosphere. Scratching his neck awkwardly, the young man tries to brush off the embarrassment while Rhonda approaches, asking nosy questions. The woman curiously asks if they had a fight, playfully teasing them about the passionate moments they shared at the festival. Gesturing nervously, Eric blames it on Bart's peer pressure, while the maid chuckles, confirming how passionate the moment really was. Flustered, the young man quickly tries to change the subject, asking about the delegation scheduled to arrive at the mansion today. Rhonda formally explains that a trade delegation from the Western Kingdoms is arriving to finalize business deals, Upon hearing they're from the West, the veteran's eyes widen, feeling a sudden surge of tension grip his chest. Excitedly, the woman explains that the local wheat is extremely valuable, revealing that even the kingdom of Armin has entered the bidding war. Worried, he fears being recognized by former wartime enemies, which could bring unnecessary chaos to his own territory. Rhonda states that it's the patriarch's duty to welcome the visitors, and Everett agrees, hoping everything goes smoothly and safely. At the elegant train station, Butler Audio notices the young master's anxiety and calmly reassures him not to worry. The old man advises him to simply repeat the greetings he taught him, and Arik thanks him with a gentle smile for the tips. Taking a deep breath to calm down, the young man reasons that no battlefield warrior would come all this way just to trade wheat. Touching the hidden dagger under his coat, the young man convinces himself that there won't be any need to resort to violence. The massive steam locomotive pulls into the platform with a loud whistle, while Aldio announces the final arrival of the merchants. The men of the trade delegation step down from the train onto the platform, ready to be formally received by the local authorities. Bowing respectfully, Arik and the butler officially welcome the delegation on behalf of the Portman family. The young man mentions their carriage ride to the estate, but is caught off guard by the terrified look on one of the merchants facing him. Trembling in sheer panic and breaking into a cold sweat, the noble merchant widens his eyes in absolute horror as he recognizes the face of the legendary Kasha. The scene cuts back to the White Group headquarters in Armin, where someone frantically asks who just arrived at the mansion. Edward rushes down the hallways in total despair alongside Agnes, anxiously talking about that person's sudden visit. The grand salon's ornate doors swing wide open, revealing the luxurious, golden interior of the estate. Seeing the guest on the couch, the Duke throws his arms open with enthusiasm, joyfully calling out to his dear sister, Egret. Sitting on the divan with a serious expression and crossed arms, the young Valentina is introduced as the group's major shareholder. The young man lifts her into the air, complimenting her height, while the scarlet-haired girl glares at him in pure annoyance. Radiating threatening flames all over her body, the girl coldly orders him to put her down before he gets burned alive. Completely terrified and dizzy with fear, the young man obeys instantly, setting her back down on the floor without hesitation. With her arms crossed, the young woman cuts straight to the point, harshly demanding the exact location of the mercenary she had asked for. Sweating profusely, Edward tries to dodge the question, awkwardly explaining that the warrior hides like an elusive ghost. Valentina screams furiously, threatening to pull her shares from the company, while the Duke panics and begs her not to do it. Squeezing her brother's cheeks tightly, the redhead angrily demands that he find Kasha's head out and bring him straight to her. With a sharp, authoritative motion, the young woman whips her black cloak around, turning her back on the terrified corporate leader. Casting a sharp, merciless glance over her shoulder, the formidable swordswoman makes it clear that she will not tolerate failure. Valentina warns him without turning back that she won't give him much time, firmly demanding that he find out where Kasha is hiding. The salon doors slam shut with a heavy thud after the girl leaves, returning the room to an oppressive silence. Agnes asks if he plans to reveal the location, and Edward instantly denies it, fearing absolute chaos if those two ever cross paths. Changing the subject, the Duke looks up and asks his secretary if the trade delegation has already been dispatched to Wyben. Agnes doubts Kasha will take the bait on the trade deal, but Edward adjusts his glasses, claiming the warrior would normally refuse. With a shrewd smile, the Duke guarantees that Arik, as the head of Portman, will have no choice but to accept the proposal. The steam locomotive cuts through the vast fields under the sunlight, speeding along the tracks toward the territory. Inside the train car, two members of the delegation sit in silence, exchanging focused, tense glances. The three members of the delegation share the train compartment in silence as the journey continues down the tracks. The gray-haired man maintains a stern, commanding expression, staring blankly ahead, lost in his thoughts. The steam locomotive finally pulls up to the platform at Wibben Station, releasing a thick cloud of smoke as it halts on the tracks. The train door slides open, and the elegant shoes of the first merchant step onto the station platform with purposeful strides. Bowing politely, Eric and Audio welcome the delegation on behalf of the Portman family to kick off the visit. The young man offers transportation to the noble residence, but notices a look of pure panic wash over one of the merchant's faces. Breaking into a cold sweat with a trembling voice, the moustached man widens his eyes in absolute horror, seeing the young man right in front of him. His companions rush to support Lord Polo, assuming he suddenly fell ill, while Eric inwardly curses running into him there. Sweating nervously, the young man knows his territory will be in danger if his identity gets exposed, deciding to conceal it at all costs. Polo panics, desperate to get back on the train, while Elric calmly steps in, apologizing for the slight delay in their welcome. Striking an awkward pose and laughing foolishly, the young man introduces himself as Elric Portman, leaving even the butler confused. Bewildered, Polo hesitates, wondering if he made a mistake after seeing the goofy demeanor of the man supposed to be the feared warrior. Elric asks if the gentleman is all right, and Polo concludes with relief that the legendary Kasha would never act like a complete fool. Staring at the young man, the merchant recalls 5 years ago when he witnessed the terrifying presence of the legendary swordsman Firsthand. In his memory, Polo trips and crashes awkwardly onto the ballroom floor after being directly confronted by the warrior. The banquet guests begin whispering among themselves as they witness the humiliating scene right in the middle of the red carpet. Suited nobles and elegant ladies exchange outraged remarks over the commotion that shattered the ball's proper etiquette. Sprawled on the floor, the man roars in fury, demanding to know how a complete nobody dares commit such insolence against him. With a cold, menacing glare, the young mercenary begins taking off his white glove, completely unbothered by the man's noble lineage, slapping the white glove hard across the nobleman's face. The young warrior states that he won't waste his time on empty words. Standing with an intimidating posture, the warrior challenges the gentleman to an honorable duel to settle that grave insult. Foaming with rage, Polo accepts the challenge, vowing to beat some manners into him, and orders the guards to bring 2 swords. A young noble in a wheelchair rushes into the hall, loudly shouting for them to stop the confrontation immediately. Hearing the authoritative shout, both the mercenary and the moustached man look over to see who is interrupting the duel. The young man in the wheelchair apologizes for his companion's behavior, but Polo snaps back irritably that it's far too late for that. Polo points an angry finger while Lord Graham steps in, demanding that the mercenary Kasha apologize at once. Hearing the name Kasha, Polo freezes in shock, remembering the legend of the terrifying demon that no one should ever cross. The memory of that ruthless warrior's cold, bloodthirsty gaze still makes the older man shiver in terror 5 years later. Snapping back to reality, Polo breathes a sigh of relief, thinking he overreacted, and agrees to ride with Elric toward the mansion. Even during the ride, the merchant grinds his teeth in frustration, still feeling haunted by that man's lingering shadow. The elegant carriage carries the guests along dirt roads under the spectacular orange glow of the twilight sky. Spotting the estate in the distance, the driver informs the passengers that the mansion is near, so everyone can get ready. In the well-lit courtyard, Taria and her maids wait beside Eric to officially welcome the new guests. With a charming smile, the noblewoman introduces herself as Taria Wibben Portman, expressing her delight in hosting the diplomats. The matriarch very graciously suggests that the travelers rest in their rooms to recover from the long journey. The noblewoman instructs the housekeeper to guide the delegation members to their quarters, and Rhonda promptly obliges. In the dead of night, under a starry sky, firm knocks on the wood echo outside one of the guest rooms. Resting comfortably in the armchair, Polo finds the knock strange and asks if it's the estate's room service. Slow, steady footsteps enter the room as a familiar voice sighs regretfully before the man. Complaining about the interruption, Polo states he doesn't want to be disturbed, but freezes in sheer terror when he sees who just walked in. With a grim, intimidating expression, Eric closes the door behind him and declares that he will indeed have to disturb Lord Polo tonight. Terrified by the young man's menacing aura, the nobleman's legs give out, and he collapses onto his knees on the bedroom floor. pointing with a trembling hand. Polo's eyes widen as he recognizes with dread the distinct, chilling gaze of the demon Kasha. The nobleman's terrified screams echo into the dead of night through the illuminated windows of the Grand Webben estate. Seeing the man's utter panic, Eric drops the act and calmly embraces his true past identity. Polo desperately asks what the young man wants, insisting that he had already offered a sincere apology on the day of the duel. Settling into the armchair, the young man coldly asks if he's referring to the day he insulted his family's honor. With a stern face and a piercing glare, the young man calmly states that he has no recollection of ever accepting that apology. Ulrich invites the merchant to take a seat and talk business, leaving the man on the floor completely dazed and bewildered. Addressing him by his full noble title, Eric asks if the entire point of his trip wasn't to negotiate for the local wheat. The two men sit across from each other in the luxurious room, setting a heavy, tense atmosphere to begin the new negotiation. Breaking into a cold sweat and cowering in his chair, Polo watches the young man from the corner of his eye, dreading any sudden hostile move. Eric calmly reveals that he met with Lord Ugel before coming here, making the visitor shudder in his seat. Stammering with curiosity, Polo asks what was discussed, and Eric smoothly replies that he received a formal proposal from that nobleman. Keeping his eyes locked on his guest, the patriarch asks if he also intended to propose an exclusive deal for all the region's wheat. In the young man's memory, Armin's envoy held a gold coin, explaining the extensive distribution network for the grain across the West. The man slid the gold across the table, shrewdly claiming that a generous commission would be set aside specifically for House Portman. With a subtle smile, the envoy laid down the single condition of selling the entire harvest exclusively to the kingdom of Armin. The nobleman looked at Eric with confidence, stating that he expected a wise decision from the new head of such a prominent house. With a smug grin and a dark gaze, the man wrapped up his offer by addressing the young man with the noble title of Lord Portman. Furious at Armin's covert move, Polo slams both hands hard on the table, loudly cursing his rivals. His face flushed with rage, the man roars, calling Ugel a backstabbing snake for making moves behind the delegation's back. Elric capitalizes on the noble's outrage, calmly proposing that they strike a direct deal instead, catching Polo completely off guard. With a confident smile, the young man promises to sell the entire stock, matching the exact pricing terms offered by Armin. Polo hesitates, arguing that even as the Empire's supply officer, he doesn't have the authority to greenlight such a high amount. Elric suggests accepting the past apology to seal their peace, wiping away any old grudges that might still linger between them. Feeling the crushing weight of the warrior's intimidating stare, Polo swallows hard and begins weighing the advantages of the deal. Polo tries to haggle, suggesting 60% of the value, but Eric refuses, stating that as patriarch, he can't take a loss. The officer grinds his teeth, feeling the relentless pressure of the negotiation, realizing he's completely cornered by the young man's cunning. Polo bumps his offer up to 70%, guaranteeing that the Empire will cover all transportation costs and tariffs. Standing his ground, Eric counters by demanding 75% under the exact same terms. The two firmly shake hands across the table, locking in the successful business deal with a swift and decisive grip. Eric expresses his gratitude, and Polo admits, deeply impressed, that he's the very first person to secure such a favorable deal from the Empire. Before wrapping up the conversation, Polo curiously asks why the young man chose to negotiate specifically with him. With a piercing, icy glare, the young man thinks to himself that he picked him simply because he was an easily manipulated target. Elric brushes it off, claiming he preferred the familiarity of their past connection, and Polo laughs awkwardly, buying the excuse completely. The young man notes that he has one final request, and the nobleman smiles, readily promising to fulfill whatever he asks. Ulrich delivers a grave warning about the consequences should any rumors spread that the legendary Kasha was spotted in Wyben, emanating a terrifying bloodlust. The young man warns that the contract will be rewritten in blood if the secret ever leaks. Pale with fright, the older man nods his head frantically, not daring to challenge the ruthless swordmaster's chilling growing threat. The next day, everyone gathers around the lavish boardroom table, where Tyria takes the floor before the delegation members. With a radiant smile, the noblewoman claps her hands and officially announces that the Portman family will close the major trade deal with the Imperial Army. Sitting beside his wife, Eric applauds with satisfaction, pleased with the successful outcome of the deal he orchestrated behind the scenes. The representative congratulates Polo on the major trade victory, and the older man awkwardly accepts, trying his best to hide his tension. Outraged by the outcome, Lord Ugel slams his hand down onto the table, furiously barking that this decision is an absolute outrage. Agitated, Armin's envoy turns to the young woman, loudly demanding to know if she was even briefed on her husband's terms. With utter composure and a graceful smile, Tyria replies that everything was decided entirely in accordance with the patriarch's wishes. Ugel tries to argue that the deal is utterly ridiculous, but he is sharply cut off by the young woman, who demands to be addressed as the lady of the house. Caught off guard by the unexpected correction, the envoy's eyes widen, stammering in confusion at her firm demeanor. Carrying an imposing aura, the noblewoman proudly declares that she is the lawful wife of the patriarch, seated right beside her. With a piercing glare, Tyria warns Lord Edmund Ugel that using the improper title is a grave sign of disrespect. Shamed and thoroughly intimidated by the lady's resolve, Ugel clenches his fist and bows, offering a formal apology to the leader's wife. Polo coughs, covering his mouth to hide his laugh, while Ugel grinds his teeth, thoroughly humiliated right there in the hall. Sitting comfortably at the table, Eric closes his eyes and lets out a relaxed sigh, pleased with his wife's bold move. Outside the manor, Elric instructs the guards to safely escort the delegation all the way back to the station. Inside the carriage, Polo holds the scroll Eric gave him and nods, sealing their secret deal. Watching the carriage pull away, the young lord answers the wave with a focused gaze, fully in control of the situation. Side by side in the sunlit courtyard, the two watch the carriage disappear down the estate's golden roads. Elric praises his wife's commanding presence, saying with a gentle smile that he had no idea she had such a firm, decisive side. With flushed cheeks and closed eyes, the young noblewoman calmly replies that she was only speaking the absolute truth. Tyria returns the compliment by highlighting his sharp business sense, catching him completely off guard. Showing the document, the noblewoman reveals she read the actual terms and figured out that the deal was massively in their favor. Eric admits he wanted to bruise the arrogant envoy's pride, and she agrees it was a brilliant blow to their rival. Walking in perfect harmony, the two head inside the manor, enjoying each other's company on a beautiful day. The story shifts back to the White Group's luxurious mansion. In the Kingdom of Armin, under the golden flag fluttering against the sky, a thunderous shout of pure outrage and despair bursts through the ornate doors of the Grand Hall, echoing across the entire palace. Clothing his head in full-blown panic, Edward dashes frantically across the blue carpet, unable to accept what just happened. In tears, the Duke screams at the top of his lungs, wondering why the kid turned down such a lucrative exclusive deal for the wheat. Flailing his arms, the president rants in total disbelief, while his secretary coldly tells him to keep his cool. Tripping over his own feet, the nobleman loses his balance and tumbles over the balcony edge, screaming in sheer terror mid-air. With lightning-fast reflexes, Ains charges forward, planting her boots firmly on the ground to catch her boss. Falling backward in free fall, the young man flails his arms in panic as the mansion's ceiling rapidly drifts away. In one swift, precise motion, the woman reaches out and grabs his hand tightly, stopping a fatal disaster in its tracks. His eyes wide behind his glasses, the Duke is left breathless by the insane strength pulling him back up. Ains yanks him inside and catches him securely in her arms, taking the brunt of the fall with her own body. The two slide together across the hall's polished floor, coming to a safe stop after the secretary's acrobatic rescue. Agnes lays into him, sternly telling her boss to calm down, while the young man mumbles sheepish apologies against her shoulder. Calm settles over the office once more as steaming, fragrant tea is gently poured into an elegant golden cup. Regaining his composure, Edward thanks his employee for the save, and she calmly asks if he's finally pulled himself together. The Duke reflects on how the young man far exceeded his expectations, wondering what he's really scheming by dealing with the Empire. Agnes firmly suggests that if you want to know someone's plans, the best way is simply to ask them straight out. Resting his chin in his hand, Edward agrees, thoughtfully concluding that asking directly is the only way to clear his doubts. Ready to make his move, the leader opens his mahogany desk drawer with a mysterious look, prepared to take the next step. Inside the velvet-lined case rests a luxurious gold, engraved firearm, which will serve as the perfect excuse for their next meeting. The scene shifts to the grand and refined estate of the Elvers Graham family, showcasing its gorgeous noble architecture. Graham warmly welcomes Mr. Polo, and the merchant hands over the scroll, asking him to review its contents. Holding the scroll with white gloves, the young noble raises an eyebrow in curiosity and asks what the document is about. Polo reveals it's a letter from Eric Portman, prompting the young man in the chair to repeat the name in surprise. Calmly unrolling the parchment, Graham skims through the written lines to grasp the sender's message. Absorbed in reading the letter, the young noble takes in every single word with a focused, deeply reflective look. Suddenly, the young man can't hold it in and lets out a stifled snicker, leaving Polo startled and bewildered by his reaction. Covering his face with his gloved hand, Graham bursts into hysterical, infectious laughter as he finishes the message. Graham is thoroughly amused picturing Polo's terror upon running into Kasha, and the man admits he nearly passed out from fright on the spot. Laughing in good spirits, the nobleman thanks him for delivering the letter, holding it with obvious satisfaction. Having finished his mission, the merchant politely takes his leave, and Graham wishes the official a safe journey back. Left alone, Graham gazes out at the horizon, wondering how his old comrade Kasha ended up in Wyban just as winter arrived. The scene cuts to a vast snow-covered hill, where the sharp crack of a gunshot shatters the landscape's dead silence. The smoking barrel of a hunting shotgun still vents smoke after landing a clean hit right in the middle of the winter forest. The young hunter celebrates his perfect shot, holding up his weapon while his friends cheer wildly over the direct hit. The boys rush over to the downed stag in the snow, celebrating that this kill will finally bump them up from mere rookies. While two of them tie up the animal, the third hunter freezes dead in his tracks, spooked by an unexpected sight among the trees. Pale and shaken, Derek ignores his friends, calling him to grab the horses. Paralyzed by the terrifying sight right in front of him, putting a finger to his lips to shush them, the hunter urges his buddies to be careful. After sensing an abnormal presence, Derek firmly orders the boys to back away from their kill, catching his friends completely off guard with the sudden warning. Sweating bullets, the young man insists he senses a demonic creature nearby and begs everyone to run right that second. His buddies mock his fear, brushing it off as just the usual winter chill, and tell him to hurry up and get the horses. A colossal paw slams into the ground with violent force, freezing the boys where they stand in utter terror from the impact. Aiming his gun in pure desperation, Derek screams at his friends to get out of the way as he spots the colossal monster right behind them. The terrifying jaws of a massive wolf gape open above them, radiating a deadly chill while the boys desperately try to scramble back. With glowing blue eyes and razor-sharp teeth, the fearsome blade wolf snarls viciously, ready to rip everything to shreds. The scene shifts to the Portman Manor, now blanketed under a thick layer of snow as the harsh winter sets in, dressed in an elegant winter outfit. Teria sighs with heavy concern over the disturbing news she just received. Kneeling on the floor, the three wounded hunters recount in sheer panic how they barely escaped the beast by a stroke of pure luck. Showing deep compassion, the noblewoman offers the survivors hot tea and lets them know she'll bring this serious matter straight to her husband. Tyria instructs Rhonda to serve the boys hot tea and a meal, and the head maid promptly complies with deep respect. Holding a monster encyclopedia with white gloves, the butler, Aldio, tries to identify the creature that attacked the region. Walking through the library alongside his lady, the butler, Cross, references the young men's accounts with the records in the tome. With a grim look, the old man breaks the news to his mistress. Everything points to the forest beast being a blade wolf. Tyria finds the demonic beast's return strange, and Aldio explains that the species had vanished once their pack leader was slain. The The noblewoman recalls that this was the very monster that scarred Elric's neck, and the butler confirms those were extremely dangerous times. Driven by fierce resolve, Teria grits her teeth, swearing to herself that she will protect the people of their estate. The lady orders a hunting party to be assembled, declaring she won't let anyone face the same danger her husband went through. Aldio bows respectfully, assuring her he'll gather the most seasoned, skilled hunters across the entire territory. Before the butler can step out, Teria calls him back once more, prompting the old man to turn and give his full attention to her next order. Placing a finger over her lips, the noblewoman firmly demands that this entire operation be kept strictly secret from Elric. Intrigued by the need for secrecy, the butler adjusts his monocle and agrees, confirming he won't breathe a word to the lord. In the outer courtyard, a black carriage awaits Eric while servants and guards bid the young lord farewell ahead of his trip. With slightly flushed cheeks, the young man promises to return soon, and Teria wishes her beloved husband a safe journey. The carriage rolls away down the dusty road while Teria and Aldio stand in silence, watching the vehicle fade into the distance. Teria explains to the butler that she kept Elric in the dark because, stubborn as he is, he'd try to hunt the beast down even with a bad leg. With a piercing, melancholic look, the young woman loses herself in the memories of that distant day when it all went down in the past. In a childhood memory, little Teria cries hysterically, reaching out her hands as she's dragged away from the danger. Even though he was just a child himself, a brave Elric brandished a wooden stick to face down the terrifying giant wolf. Determined to keep her husband from getting hurt again, the noblewoman asks if the requested elite squad has fully assembled. Hunters armed with shotguns bow with sharp discipline as Aldio presents the finest marksman in the entire territory. Teria declares she intends to settle this before her husband gets back, leaving the butler utterly shocked to see her joining the hunt. The noblewoman states with dignity that it is her duty to ride with the soldiers, since they are putting their lives on the line under her command. Aldio respectfully accepts her decision, but sets a non-negotiable condition. She must fall back the second the monster shows up. The story cuts to the town center of Wyben, where snow blankets the rooftops and the bustling streets of the noble village. The local clinic's wooden sign hangs heavy with snow as a medical checkup gets underway inside. Examining the scar on the young man's knee, the elderly doctor smiles with satisfaction, confirming his recovery is almost complete. Eric asks if he can finally ditch the cane, but the doctor urges caution, asking him to rely on it for just a little longer. The veteran physician adjusts his glasses and curiously asks if that old scar on his neck left any lasting side effects. Touching the back of his neck with an easygoing smile, Eric replies that the doctor who treated him back then was quite renowned. The doctor recalls the agony of treating the wolf's venom, revealing that Eric's late father desperately begged on his knees for his son's life. Shocked by the unexpected reveal, the young man's eyes go wide, unable to believe his strict, unbending father ever lowered himself like that. The doctor mentions he had never seen Lord Hoven so pale with sheer terror, terrified of losing his own boy to the beast. Remembering his father's stern demeanor, Eric smiles with a touch of nostalgia, admitting he can't even picture a scene like that. Saying goodbye as they step toward the exit, the physician doubles down on his warning for the young man not to overexert himself in the coming days. The clinic's wooden door swings softly open as the young lord gets ready to head back out into the snow-covered streets. Leaning on his cane, the nobleman walks at a slow pace down the icy sidewalk, closely flanked by his loyal guard. A familiar voice suddenly calls out his name, asking about his treatment, causing Eric to stop in surprise and turn around. Turning his head, Eric recognizes the goateed warrior standing before him and, caught off guard, calls out his old friend's name. With a warm grin, Leighton celebrates his buddy's return to Wyben, enthusiastically greeting him by his old rank of captain. The two friends embrace with pure joy, and the knight explains he came rushing over the second he received Elric's letter. Elric asks about his induction into the Royal Knights, and Leighton proudly shows off the gorgeous sword granted to him by the royal family. The two agree to grab a drink to catch up, with Elric promising to pick up the tab and telling his buddy to lead the way. A messenger comes running up out of breath with an urgent letter, just as Leighton gets annoyed at being interrupted on his day off. Holding out the scroll with trembling hands, the man frantically reveals that it's a distress call straight from the Portman house. Stunned by the alarming news, Eric and the knight's eyes go wide, immediately demanding to know what the hell is going on. Breaking into a cold sweat, the messenger reports in a shaky voice that Lady Tyria Wideman of House Portman is caught in the crisis. Hearing that his wife was ambushed by a demonic beast, Eric's expression instantly twists into pure shock and sheer dread. Deep in the frozen mountains, echoes of shotgun blasts tear through the frigid air, signaling that a violent clash has begun. Glowing-eyed demonic wolves charge at full speed across the snowy forest, snarling aggressively as they hunt down their prey. One of the brave hunters fires his weapon, creating a bright flash amidst the blizzard to push back the monster onslaught. A pinpoint shot strikes one of the wolves, right in the skull, spraying blood onto the snow as the beast howls in agony from the hit. Two marksmen hold the firing line, while Marie guides a frantic Tyria away from the open field towards safety. Sprinting through the blizzard, Marie spots an old wooden cabin through the trees and points her mistress toward the shelter. Rushing inside, the two bolt through the rustic shelter and slam the heavy door shut to block out the brutal storm. Outside, one of the fighters activates a light stone, unleashing a brilliant burst of blue magic light into the dark woods. Using the magical glow as bait to draw the beasts away, the hunters dash in the opposite direction to protect their lady. The distraction works, and the entire pack chases after the glowing magic across the snow, drawing the danger away from the cabin. Huddled on the straw bed, Tyria and her maid shiver from the bitter cold and terror, wrapped in blankets as they wait for rescue. Looking guilty, Tyria apologizes for dragging the young girl into such danger, but Marie insists she was the one who begged to come along. With teary eyes, Marie tries to soothe her lady, reassuring her that the distress call was sent and help will arrive shortly. Tyria gives a faint smile, admitting she's just relieved she kept the secret and didn't put the family head in harm's way again. Deeply touched by the noblewoman's selfless devotion to her husband, Marie can't hold back her tears and weeps softly at her side. Cutting through the blinding blizzard at full throttle, Alric and Lawton ride hard together on a single horse toward the danger zone. His chest tight with anguish, the young man wonders why his wife went behind his back, dreading the thought that she saw him as someone she couldn't rely on. Leighton yells his name at the top of his lungs, pulling Eric out of his spiraling thoughts with a dead, serious look. The knight tells him to stay calm and vows to rescue the lady no matter what, prompting the young lord to thank his comrade for his unwavering loyalty. The knight flashes back to their childhood, when he fled in pure panic, dragging little Tyria behind him, while Elric stood alone to fight. In the memory of the past, the young hare stayed behind all by himself, brandishing a branch to hold off the demonic beast. Overcome with remorse, young Leighton wept in desperation back then, promising to fetch help as fast as he could to save his comrade. Now in the present, the warrior rides with fierce resolve, swearing to himself that he will never leave his leader to fight alone again. A wounded marksman waves his gun through the blizzard, calling out loudly to the knights galloping through the woods. The two arrive on the scene and quickly close in, while one of the injured men recognizes the young captain. Elric frantically asks about his wife's condition, and the soldier reports that she managed to take shelter in a nearby cabin. The young man anxiously adds that his comrades got cornered by the pack while trying to lure the monsters away from the lady. Exhaling a breath of frosty air, Eric demands to be guided to the group, determined to save the men trapped in the woods. Leighton firmly grips the young man's shoulder and shuts him down, refusing to let his friend risk himself with an unhealed leg. The knight orders Eric to go to his wife, while he handles rescuing the hunters himself, brushing off the danger of the blade wolves. Placing a hand over his chest with a confident smirk, Leighton tells his friend to trust him, proving he's no longer that cowardly kid. Elric smiles with genuine pride, sincerely acknowledging that his childhood companion has grown into a true, noble knight. Drawing his sword, Lighten sprints off with the guide deep into the forest, ready to take on the demonic beasts. Left alone in the howling snowstorm, the young lord spins around in a hurry, knowing he must reach his wife's shelter as fast as possible. Fighting against the freezing gales of the heavy blizzard, the young man pushes hard up the hill toward the noblewoman's hideout. His boots sink deep into the soft powder with every single stride, demanding every ounce of strength to keep pushing through the woods. Shielding his eyes with his arm, Eric curses the sudden fury of the storm, praying desperately that everyone is safe and sound. Through the icy haze, the young lord finally spots the silhouette of the frost-covered cabin perched atop the wooded slope. Shoving the door open with force, the young man stands in the doorway, letting the freezing blast and swirling snowflakes spill inside. Out of breath and his eyes filled with sheer desperation, Eric cries out his beloved wife's name for all to hear. Startled by the figure in the doorway, the two women pull the blankets tight, and Tyria stammers, unable to fathom how he found her. Without a second's hesitation, Eric strides across the room and pulls his wife into a fierce embrace, burying his face in her shoulder with massive relief. Her heart hammering and her face burning red, the noblewoman flusteredly stammers, asking why on earth he came all the way out to this shelter. Clinging tightly to his wife's back, the young man's fingers dig into the blanket, betraying the overwhelming relief washing over his chest. Elric grips the noblewoman's shoulders and snaps in frustration, demanding to know how she could take such a reckless risk without telling him. Lowering her eyes sorrowfully, the young woman explains in a soft voice that she just wanted to keep the family head out of danger. With a vulnerable look, Eric asks if she really found him that untrustworthy, making the noblewoman's eyes go wide in shock. Panicking, Tyria instantly denies it and wraps her arms tightly around her husband's neck, desperate to clear up the misunderstanding. Returning the embrace with deep tenderness, the young man tells her he's just glad she's safe, making her promise never to take risks alone again. Resting her head against her husband's chest with a sweet smile, Tyria makes the promise, finally feeling safe and protected. Huddled in the corner of the cabin, Marie watches her master's tender reunion and beams with a sweet, deeply moved smile. Urgent banging on the wooden door shatters the intimate moment, instantly putting the couple on high alert as they snap their heads around. Throwing the door open with a wide grin, Marie cheers out loud as she sees the brave hunters have returned safe and sound. Elric commends the squad's swift work and thanks them for their efforts, preparing to arrange a safe trip back to the manor. Scanning his eyes over the men in the room, the young lord senses something is wrong, his words freezing as his face darkens. Eric firmly demands to know where Lighten is, and the hunters look down, hesitating, completely at a loss for words. One hunter reveals that Lighten stayed behind alone to hold off the entire pack so they could make it out alive. Clenching his fist in utter frustration, Eric grits his teeth, cursing his childhood friend's reckless gamble. The young lord orders the men to escort Tyria and Marie down the mountain, declaring with absolute authority that he's going back into the woods to save Lighten. As Eric turns to leave, a gentle hand grabs the sleeve of his coat tightly, stopping him dead in his tracks. Surprised by the tug, the young man looks over his shoulder and meets the deeply distraught gaze of the noblewoman at his side. With tears brimming in her eyes, Tyria confesses her terror of seeing him hurt and begs him to promise he'll return alive from the battle. Placing his hand over his wife's, Eric warmly thanks her for caring and tells her to put her faith in what he can do. With a calm, confident look, the young man swears he will bring the knight back and return to her arms without a single scratch. Her voice choked with emotion, the lady firmly warns him that she will never forgive him if he breaks his word and doesn't come back alive. Eric nods, promising with an affectionate smile that he'll hold that demand deep in his heart. In the frozen clearing, the sharp claws of a demonic beast hit the snow-covered ground, kicking up clouds of frost in its sprint. A wolf leaps into the air with its fangs bared, while the knight raises his blood-soaked sword, primed to strike. With a vicious downward cleave, Lighten cuts the beast clean in half mid-air, dark blood splattering across the frozen snow. With blood running down his face and his breathing ragged, the knight's strength begins to fade amidst the howling blizzard. Leaning on his blood-stained sword, the knight glares down dozens of demonic wolves, emerging from between the tree line, his vision blurred with blood. Lighten lets out a bitter laugh, genuinely surprised that so many beasts had banded together. Surrounded by an endless horde of monsters, the warrior feels his vision go dark from the massive blood loss during the fight. Dropping to his knees in utter exhaustion, the knight yells with resigned pride that at least he will die an honorable death in his homeland. With trembling hands lacking the strength to raise his blade, he finds the predator's hesitation odd and wonders why they aren't attacking. Between the frost-laden trees, the alpha wolf snout emerges, bearing razor-sharp fangs and unleashing a terrifying snarl. With eyes blazing in blue flames, the colossal beast pounces violently at the knight, lunging in for the kill. Closing his eyes in the face of imminent death, Lighten braces for the fatal crush of the jaws, snapping inches from his face. A deafening gunshot rips through the beast's skull in a violent muzzle flash, blowing the monster's jaw apart before it can land the bite. Cracking open a bloodied eye in sheer shock, the warrior wonders in disbelief if the marksman came back to save him. Holding the smoking shotgun, Eric mocks his friend's sorry state, leaving the knight wide-eyed as he recognizes his young captain. Elric comments on the gun's sheer firepower and reassures the wounded knight, firmly stating that Tyria is already safe. Maintaining a cool composure against the closing pack, the young man mentions he needs to ask his friend for a tricky favor. Staring at the blood-stained weapon in Lighten's shaking hands, Eric points straight at the noble sword gifted by the king. Facing down dozens of beasts poised to strike, the young family head casually asks if he can borrow the blade. Offering up the hilt, Lighten loyally declares that for his captain, he would gladly hand over his very life. The knight warns him that real steel is brutally heavy and nothing like the wooden practice swords they swung as kids. Wielding the blade with unreal mastery, Eric effortlessly spins the sword in seamless arcs, leaving his friend completely speechless. Glancing sideways through the storm, the young lord asks if his friend was ever curious about his life during the 10 years he vanished. Turning to face the beasts with a cold, merciless glare, he declares he's about to show him the whole truth with his own 2 hands. With blue eyes glowing in the snowy darkness, the demon wolves bare their sharp fangs, ready for a deadly strike. Gathering a glowing sphere of mana in his free hand, Eric calmly recalls that these beasts are drawn to magic. Lured by the released magical power, the demon wolves charge ferociously across the clearing toward the warrior. Wielding a blade, cloaked in arcs of mana lightning, the swordsman dashes forward at blinding speed against the leaping pack. A dazzling flash of speed carves through the frozen ground, kicking up a thick cloud of snow with every strike the hero makes. With surgical precision and fluid movements, Eric cleanly decapitates the first wolf, sending frozen blood spraying into the air. Without breaking his rhythm, he coldly spins his blade, tearing through another beast that collapses amid flashes of lightning. Jaw dropped, Lighten watches the devastating trail of slashes from afar, wondering what happened during his leader's years away. Remembering the playful boy from the past, the knight realizes in disbelief that this man is no longer the little captain he once knew. Surrounded on all sides, the veteran unleashes a relentless barrage of attacks, effortlessly reaping the beasts' lives with total mastery. Keeping a steady gaze without a single moment of hesitation, Eric swings his weapon in a perfect arc, silencing the creature's howls. A storm of slashes illuminates the snowy forest as the beasts' bodies pile up around the swordsman. Raising his left hand high, the young man gathers a massive wave of magical power that surges upward toward the clouds. A blast of pure blue energy crackles through the air, lighting up the entire forest canopy with a blinding, powerful glow. Landing firmly on the icy ground, Eric brings the massacre to an end, dispelling the raw energy swirling around his blade. Mouth agape and in sheer shock, the wounded knight can barely process the absurd level of power he just witnessed. turning around calmly amidst the fallen beasts. The young man casually asks his friend what he thought of the demonstration. With a warm, relaxed smile on his face, Eric playfully asks if that display was enough to satisfy his curiosity. Collapsing onto the cold snow, Leighton exhales in sheer disbelief, completely at a loss for words to describe how stunned he is. Wiping the blood from his face, the knight admits in utter confusion that seeing such insane skill only made him more bewildered. Taking shelter inside the cabin, Elric thanks him for his invaluable help, but his friend humbly admits he could barely do a thing. With bandages covering his wounds, Leighton rests his sword on his lap and respectfully points out that the captain did all the heavy lifting. Elric disagrees, saying he couldn't have pulled it off alone, and cautiously asks his loyal childhood friend for one more special favor. The warrior smiles, saying he owes his life to the young man twice over, and insists that Eric doesn't need to ask. He only needs to command. Eric proposes that Leighton take full credit for hunting the monsters to avoid drawing unwanted attention, leaving his friend completely shocked. Crossing his arms, the young man explains that he has personal reasons for staying in the shadows, while Leighton hesitates to accept such unearned honor. Staring down at the floor with a solemn look, the knight weighs the request, fully understanding how important it is to protect his friend. Standing before the crowd in the town square, the people of Wibben cheer in unison, hailing Ludden as the great hero who saved their land from the beasts. An elderly noble warmly praises the knight's courage, glorifying the feat of taking down so many dangerous monsters all on his own. Feeling awkward, Leighton stammers in embarrassment, trying to hide his guilt by discreetly glancing away into the crowd. Blending into the crowd, Eric winks with a knowing smile and puts a finger to his lips, silently reassuring him to keep the secret. Swallowing hard with a nervous drop of sweat, the warrior embraces the role, resolved to honor the silent pact he made with his captain. Adopting a dignified stance, Leighton declares that he fought for the peace of Wibben, and the elder proudly celebrates the honor he brings to the realm. The town leader raises his arm, calling on the entire city to joyfully salute the knight who rid their lands of the monstrous threat. Cheers and applause from the villagers echo across the lively town, celebrating the supposed victory of their new protector. With a quiet, satisfied smile on his face, the true hero quietly gets ready to slip away and return to his wife's arms. In the vast snow-covered courtyard in front of the Portman estate, Tyria anxiously waits for her husband's return alongside the servants. The carriage drawn by two black horses glides along the snowy path, slowly approaching the estate's gates, the wooden wheels slow to a stop, kicking up icy powder as the carriage finally pulls up right in front of the main entrance. Stepping down smoothly from the carriage, Eric lands on the solid ground while Tyria turns around, her face lighting up to welcome the young master. With a lovely smile on her face, Tyria warmly welcomes him back, tenderly admitting she was worried about what took him so long. Scratching the back of his neck in embarrassment, Eric apologizes, explaining that he ran late saying his thanks and goodbyes to his friend. Tyria notices he is walking without his cane and asks about his injury, while the young man recalls the doctor's strict orders to rest. Lightly tapping his own lead, Eric playfully shows that he is in tip-top shape to put the lady's mind at ease. Taking on a more serious look, the young man gazes into his wife's golden eyes, preparing to make an important request. With a slight blush on his cheeks, Eric affectionately asks her to never put herself in danger like that ever again. Touched by his heartfelt care, the young noblewoman blushes softly and replies with a sweet smile that she will take his words to heart. Eric invites his wife to head inside the manor and escape the bitter cold, and the two walk together in perfect harmony through the snow. Grasping the door handle with his leather glove, the young man opens the main entrance with a gentle, chivalrous gesture. Stepping aside with a warm smile on his face, Eric politely gestures for his lady to lead the way into the cozy entrance hall. Watching the tender moment between the nobles, the maids smile and whisper among themselves that spring seems to have finally arrived. Leaning her head shyly against her husband's shoulder, Tyria sweetly thanks him for being so caring toward her today. All of a sudden, Tyria's legs give out beneath her, and she collapses with a burning fever, throwing Eric into complete panic. Cradling his unconscious wife in his arms, Eric descends into sheer desperation, shouting and begging for her to wake up. The doctor examines the unconscious young woman in bed, while the maid tends to her gently amid the heavy, tense silence of the room. Wearing a grave expression, the experienced doctor turns to the young man and delivers the grim news that her condition is far worse than he thought. Hearing the doctor warn that the noblewoman's life is hanging by a thread, all the color drains from Eric's face in pure despair. Looking at the stunned young man, the veteran doctor solemnly recalls seeing that exact same crushed look on his father's face years ago. With trembling hands, the young man tightly grabs the doctor's shoulder, begging him to do everything within his power. His voice thick with pain, Elric pleads with the man to do whatever it takes to save the most important woman in his life. Moved by the young man's desperation, the physician bows respectfully, assuring him that he will do everything humanly possible to heal her. The doctor's carriage rushes away down the frozen road, rattling violently across the winter snow-packed trails. Standing all alone in the freezing courtyard, the young man lets out a foggy breath with a heavy heart, sadly whispering his beloved's name. Overwhelmed by sheer grief, the young man sinks to his knees in the snow, prompting the distressed maids to rush toward him across the yard. The maids hurry over with deep concern, trying to soothe him and gently reminding him that he needs to stay strong and keep his composure. Through the manor's glowing window, the lonely silhouette of the young man can be seen slumped over the dining table in the middle of the day, sitting before an untouched plate of food. Eric keeps his head down, completely devoid of any appetite to enjoy his meal. The memory of Tyria sweetly asking if he didn't like the food flashes through his mind, deepening the hollow ache in his chest. The vivid memory of his wife's pure, welcoming smile comes rushing back, bringing deep sorrow to the isolated young man's heart. Staring at the empty table, the young man bitterly regrets spending so much time apart from her, having barely talked to his partner. Consumed by remorse, he tears himself apart, wondering why he didn't try harder to get closer and talk to her more each day. Spotting the untouched meal, the maid lets out a surprised sigh, realizing the young master has barely had a single bite. Holding the food tray, the two maids exchange worried glances as they realize their lord has completely lost his appetite. Rhonda hurries down the corridor after the young master, while Marie stays in the dining room, holding the serving dish with a heavy heart. Carefully, the maid clears the untouched plate from the table, preparing to carry the tray back down to the kitchen. Holding the tray, Marie remarks sorrowfully that he always used to eat with such joy, lamenting how drained and helpless he looks now. Catching up to him in the hallway, Rhonda tries to persuade him to eat, but Alric apologizes, saying he has no appetite whatsoever. Deeply moved, Rhonda suggests taking a walk through the garden Tyria lovingly cared for, hoping it might help clear his troubled mind. In the estate's courtyard, a stunning patch of blue roses blooms with vibrant life, spreading vivid colors through the winter chill. Admiring the plants, Eric asks about the garden, and Rhonda confirms that Tyria tended to it with immense love and devotion. Surprised to see flowers blooming in the dead of winter, Eric learns that the lady's magic and tender care made this natural miracle possible. Rhonda brings up his old interest in plants, but the young man somberly replies that it's nothing more than a distant memory now. Standing among the petals, the veteran reflects that his mind no longer holds the fragrance of flowers, only the bitter scars of his past, brutal memories of severed limbs, roaring flames, and the full stench of death on the battlefield flood back to torment his thoughts. Rhonda mentions that the mistress knew a great deal about herbs, revealing that Tyria's childhood dream was to become a skilled doctor. Surprised by the revelation, Eric finds it unusual that a young woman from such an esteemed, noble family would wish to practice as a simple doctor. A forgotten memory surfaces in his mind, showing the moment he handed a small pouch of medicine into the little girl's hands. Placing a hand to his forehead, the young man assures her he is fine and admits that he just remembered something very important he had long forgotten. Feeling the icy chill in the air, the housekeeper suggests heading back inside, and Elric quietly agrees as they make their way back to the manor. The sun dips below the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of gold as night gently settles over the grand estate. Inside the study, the butler looks up in surprise, asking what brought the young master to this workspace at such an hour. Stepping into the office, Eric finds it strange to see the butler sitting at the desk, wondering why he is sitting in the mistress's place. Audio gestures to the stack of paperwork and explains that he learned to manage documents after spending his entire life serving the previous patriarch. Frustrated, Elric snaps that the butler should have helped her more so she wouldn't run herself sick working all alone. With a respectful tone and a solemn gaze, the seasoned butler explains that he was simply following the direct orders of the mistress. The young man offers to help sort through the paperwork, but Aldio politely declines, preferring to focus on the tasks on his own. Elric mentions he will have Rhonda bring up some hot tea and takes his leave, while the old man respectfully thanks him for the kind gesture. Pushing the golden tea cart through the hallways, Marie heads toward the private chambers of the estate's young master. Knocking softly on the door, the maid announces she has brought tea, and Elric answers from inside, granting her permission to enter. Stepping into the room, the young maid finds him lost in thought on the sofa, immediately picking up on the heavy weight of worry in his eyes. Holding the tea tray with both hands, Marie cautiously steps forward, looking at the young master with obvious concern. Tilting the fine porcelain teapot, the maid pours the fragrant brew into the cup as gentle steam rises into the quiet room. Marie gives a gentle smile and offers the cup, explaining that this is the rose tea her mistress always enjoys. Staring down at the rose petal floating in the hot drink, Eric murmurs somberly as his thoughts drift into old memories. Trying to comfort her master's troubled heart, the young maid urges him to cheer up, reassuring him that the lady will recover soon. Elric offers a gentle smile, rubbing the back of his neck as he sincerely apologizes for making her worry over him for no reason. Marie quickly bows with flushed cheeks, stammering shyly as she explains she simply couldn't help noticing how sad he looked. Overwhelmed with embarrassment, the maid squeaks out a goodbye and bolts out of the room, slamming the door shut in a frantic rush. Alone once again in the silence of his room, the young man stares at the teacup on the table and sighs with longing, calling out his wife's name. Under the silver glow of the night's moonlight, his anguished thoughts echo with a desperate plea for his lady to return safe and sound. Over at the village clinic, a single lit window holds out against the cold night, showing that the patient remains under close medical watch. The nurse jots down notes on her clipboard while Tyria burns with fever in bed, letting out heavy, exhausted sighs. Barely managing to open her tear-filled eyes in her weakened state, the young noblewoman anxiously thinks that she can't just stay lying here like this. Squeezing her eyes shut, she weeps in silence, terrified that her husband is suffering terribly on her account. Noticing her patient's distress and silent tears, the medical assistant steps closer in concern, gently asking how she feels. The distant voices of the maids calling out to her echo in her mind as the young woman rests in bed during her slow recovery. Days later, under the bright morning sun, the noble carriage returns to the Portman estate, rolling smoothly across the melting snow. Fully recovered and beaming with a lovely smile, Tyria steps down from the carriage, greeting the staff with overwhelming joy and relief. Seeing their mistress healthy and well, Rhonda and Marie dash across the courtyard, crying out in sheer excitement over her long-awaited return. Marie throws herself into the lady's arms, sobbing with pure relief, while Tyria hugs her back, reassuring her that she feels completely fine. Rhonda bows respectfully, celebrating her mistress's recovery and warmly inviting her inside to the comfort of the manor. With flushed cheeks and a warm heart, Tyria smiles, eagerly wondering how her dear husband has been spending these past few days. The front doors burst wide open and Eric comes charging out at the top of his lungs, desperate to know if his wife is truly back and safe. Their eyes lock in a magical instant, and time seems to stand still as both of their hearts race with overwhelming relief. Unable to contain his raw relief and emotion, Eric screams out his wife's name and frantically sprints straight toward the love of his life. Running wildly and shouting his head off, the young man charges in like a hurricane, completely catching Tyria off guard with his explosive excitement. In a passionate, protective embrace, Eric wraps his arms tightly around his wife, pulling her close to his chest with deep affection. With a tear streaming down his cheek, the young man softly apologizes, tenderly begging just to hold her in his arms for a little while longer. A starry night falls peacefully over the Grand Manor, bringing a soothing atmosphere of calm and relief to the entire household. In her bedroom, Tyria gleefully dances around hugging her pillow, repeating her husband's title with a heart overflowing with love. With a radiant smile, she bounces on the bed surrounded by pure sparkles of joy, celebrating all the affection her partner showered on her. Remembering the sudden, crushing hug, the young woman buries her flushed face into the blankets, her heart pounding a mile a minute. Kicking her legs in the air, the noblewoman rolls around the bed in utter embarrassment, admitting that her heart felt like it was about to explode. Swung open with a broad smile, the door reveals Mary entering the room with a tray of tea ready to serve her beloved mistress. Caught completely off guard in the middle of her excited squealing, Tyria shrinks into the bed with wide eyes and a bright crimson face. Quickly regaining her composure with a sweet smile, the noblewoman calmly grants the maid permission to enter her cozy room. Marie comes forward with a playful giggle, overjoyed to see her mistress looking so lively, healthy, and full of good spirits. Sipping tea at the table, Tyria reveals that she actually met her husband in their childhood, though she explains he didn't remember their first encounter. Curious and with her eyes sparkling, Marie leans eagerly over the table, dying to hear every single detail about their first meeting. Holding her teacup tenderly, Tyria shares that he was ridiculously bold, proposing to her on the very first day they ever met. Marie is completely blown away by the young master's boldness, while Tyria laughs, adding that he jumped to conclusions and bolted before ever hearing her say yes. Looking down at her teacup, the young woman warmly recalls how fate brought them back together that autumn at the Portman estate. In her memories of the past, the patriarchs of both noble houses gathered at the mansion to discuss pressing political matters. A rigid wooden cane strikes a child's palm with a sharp, cruel snap, delivering a harsh disciplinary punishment. And during the severe punishment, little Tyria holds out her stinging hands, holding back tears under the cold gaze of her tutor. With an icy scowl, the stern woman in dark robes brings the cane down relentlessly, disciplining the little girl without an ounce of mercy. The maid attempts to step in, reminding her that they are guests in the Portman house, but the lady snaps back with an authoritative shout. Glaring down at her daughter who keeps her head bowed, the matriarch barks her demands, coldly warning that she will only repeat herself once. The noblewoman strictly declares that marrying into the Nimrod family is absolutely vital for the survival and future of their house. Threatening to starve her for days, the woman demands total submission, forbidding the girl from uttering a single complaint about her assigned fate. Resolute footsteps echo down the grand palace hallway, and one of the ornate doors opens to reveal the lonely little girl inside. The maid kneels before the hurting child, gently asking her to wait right there while she goes to fetch some medicine for the pain. The servant hurries across the red carpet, leaving the young noblewoman all alone in the middle of the massive library. Clasping her hands tightly over her blue dress, the little girl trembles in the quiet room, holding back her tears after the brutal scolding. Sobbing quietly, the girl sadly wonders why on earth she is being forced to marry a man she doesn't even know. A heavy book suddenly falls from above, crashing onto the floor with a loud thud, startling the little girl as two hands appear between the shelves. Little Eric hops down to the floor and bends over to pick up the fallen tome, looking at the girl with curious, attentive eyes. Scratching his cheek in pure embarrassment, the boy raises his hand with a friendly wave, casually greeting her on their unexpected reunion. Wiping away her tears, Tyria asks what he's doing here, and Elric replies that he lives in the mansion. Noticing she speaks quite normally now, tilting his head with genuine curiosity, the boy asks who this mysterious fiancée is that she's supposed to marry. Lowering her gaze with a sad look, the girl confesses that the union isn't her choice, but rather her duty to her her family. Looking at her with fierce determination, Eric asks if she would like his help, taking the little noblewoman completely by surprise. Extending his hand, the boy tells her to follow him, firmly promising that he will stop that marriage if she doesn't want it. With flushed cheeks and eyes wide with wonder, little Tyria is completely mesmerized by his fearless bravery. Marie lets out an excited squeal, asking in absolute fascination where on earth the young master took her right after that. With a mischievous grin stretched across her face, the maid shows boundless curiosity, begging to know where the two of them ran off to. In the flashback, young Bart and Leyton stare wide-eyed in awe, openly praising how pretty the newly arrived girl is. Giving a proud thumbs up, Eric brags that he was telling the truth, while Tyria holds her parasol, hiding shyly behind him. His friends tease him, claiming he got flat-out rejected, while a bright, red Eric yells back, insisting she just hasn't answered the proposal yet. While Eric angrily chases his friends around, little Tyria lets out a charming giggle, finding the whole spectacle hilarious. Yelling at the top of his lungs, the boy tries to cover his embarrassment by claiming it was all part of his master plan to recruit such a pretty doctor. Nodding their heads in total sync, the two boys sincerely agree, admitting they've never seen such a gorgeous doctor before. Thrilled with their squad's newest recruit, the little leader orders the start of their daily patrol, and the boys cheer in wild excitement. Walking side by side across the lush green grass, the two children share a peaceful, sweet moment together under the warm sunlight. With a very serious and solemn tone, the boy quotes military law, explaining that a soldier belongs to the squad until officially relieved of duty. Elric assures her that since she is now his unit's doctor, she won't have to marry anyone, filling the little girl's heart with immense hope. Blushing slightly, the boy asks if she will finally give him an answer to his marriage proposal once he becomes a true royal knight. Back in the present, Marie sighs dreamily at the story, gushing over how wonderful it is that the young master never gave up on his beloved. Tyria chuckles softly and explains that the other boys came running back right at that second, stopping her from giving him her final answer. In the nostalgic memory, the four children spent the entire afternoon running wild and free across the rolling green hills and fields. A startled little squirrel clutches in a corn while the boys shout playfully, declaring the little critter to be a dangerous village-level monster. Laughing hysterically, the boys chase the little creature through the woods, thoroughly enjoying every second of their playful game. With a tender smile, the noblewoman recalls that thanks to Elric, she discovered for the very first time just how wonderful a single day could truly be. Pointing toward the trees, the boy proudly shows his new squad doctor the rustic wooden cabin they've been using as their secret hideout. Looking on in wonder, the young noblewoman stares at the wooden shack, happily admitting she has never seen anything like it before. Eric grins with confidence, sharing his grand dream of building a massive training center right on that spot once he becomes a knight. His two friends sprint excitedly inside the cabin, leaving Eric and Tyria standing alone together out on the grassy clearing. Turning toward the girl, the boy holds out a tied-up cloth pouch, leaving the young lady deeply curious about what could be inside. Delicately, the girl extends her gloved hands, carefully receiving the small package handed to her by her young partner. Holding the little pouch in both hands, the girl blinks her big golden eyes, curiously asking what's kept hidden inside it. Blushing with embarrassment, the boy explains that a doctor needs to know her herbs, telling her to make sure she plants those seeds later. In the present, Marie gestures excitedly, her eyes sparkling as she asks if her mistress actually ended up planting that gift. With a breathtaking smile, Tyria confirms that the gorgeous blue flowers in the garden grew from those very seeds he gave her that day. Completely enchanted by the romance, the maid clasps her hands together, sighing dreamily that the young master has always been a true romantic. A firm knock on the bedroom door abruptly interrupts their lovely chat, heralding an unexpected visitor to the ladies' quarters. Rhonda calls out from the doorway that Marie has been in there far too long, and the maid gasps, clapping her hand over her mouth in panic. After getting caught gossiping, pushing the door open, Rhonda sternly scolds her subordinate, who cowers and shrinks her shoulders, profusely apologizing for losing track of time. Tyria steps in with a sweet smile and playfully takes the blame, explaining that she was the one who kept the maid caught up in conversation. The housekeeper wags a finger at her mistress, scolding her gently and ordering Taria to get right back in bed, since she needs plenty of rest to heal. Obediently, the young woman slips under the covers, pulling the sheets all the way up to her nose with a shy look and a nervous drop of sweat. Bowing respectfully, Rhonda bids her lady goodnight, and Tyria responds warmly before heading to bed. The lights throughout the estate slowly fade under the starry blue sky, bringing a quiet, peaceful night to the mansion. Tucked beneath the soft blankets, Tyria sleeps with a serene expression, dreaming of her childhood days. In her memories, the old wooden cabin appears, bathed in the golden sunlight of an unforgettable summer afternoon. Worn out after a long day of fun, the four children sleep peacefully side by side on the porch of their old hudyat, gently opening her golden eyes. Little Tyria looks at the boy sleeping next to her, her heart fluttering, delicately stroking young Elric's hair. The little girl whispers her thanks for the incredible day they shared. Leaning in with a sweet smile, she secretly declares that she has made her final decision about the future. With a soft kiss on his cheek, she lovingly promises that one day she will truly become his lawful wife. The morning's first rays and chirping birds herald a bright new day over the noble estate. Stretching out at the edge of the bed, Tyria wakes up with a lovely blush, fondly recalling the dream she just had. Dressed in her white nightgown with her long hair flowing freely, the young lady walks barefoot toward her husband's chambers. Opening the door, the noblewoman is startled to find Eric already awake and ready to leave. Standing right in the doorway, leaning his arm against the frame with a bright red face, Eric flashes a wide grin and stammers a good morning to his wife. Shyly, the young man kindly asks if she would like to join him for a refreshing cup of morning tea. Tyria gladly accepts the invitation, but gently asks him to wait a moment while she gets dressed in her room. Chuckling awkwardly, Eric waves his hands and tells her to take her time and get ready at her own pace. Pausing at the doorway, Tyria timidly calls out to her husband, saying she has a special request for the young master. Her cheeks burning with embarrassment, she gathers her courage and asks him to simply call her his wife from now on. Completely flustered by the request, Eric scratches his head awkwardly, feeling his face burn with pure embarrassment. Flashing a warm, tender smile, the young man grants her wish, telling her he will be waiting for her, calling her his wife. Beaming with joy, Tyria clasps her hands in ecstasy, celebrating with a huge smile surrounded by imagined flowers and light. On the small table's patterned cloth, two elegant porcelain cups give off the inviting aroma of freshly brewed tea. Correcting himself to call her his wife, Eric asks about the newspaper, and Tyria explains that she tracks the news for business. Reading the latest updates, Tyria shares that the kingdom of Cheber has surrendered to the Western Empire, putting the veteran on high alert. Covering his mouth, Eric recalls serving as a mercenary in Cheber and wonders what the outcome of that conflict will mean. Suddenly leaning in to read alongside her, Eric catches the noblewoman off guard, making her blush instantly. Eyes fixed on the pages, the young man laments the nation's inevitable fall after years of holding off enemy attacks. Feeling the warmth of their shoulders brushing together, Eric shudders as he realizes just how close they are. Quickly pulling back, Eric apologizes for getting so close, but a shy Tyria replies that it is only natural between married couples. The two remain seated with blushing faces, exchanging stolen glances in a silence thick with romance. Feeling his pulse race, the young man swallows hard and presses his lips together, trying to control the intense attraction he feels. Gently tilting her head, the young lady looks up with golden eyes full of anticipation, gazing at the young master's profile. With a soft smile and parted lips, Tyria shows all her affection, inviting him into an intimate moment. Softly closing her eyes, the noblewoman tilts her head as Eric leans in, his heart overflowing with desire. Tenderly touching his wife's soft cheek, the young man closes his eyes and leans forward, ready to seal a passionate kiss. The door bursts open, and Marie barges in shouting, announcing the arrival of the official invitation to the grand annual royal banquet. Choking in surprise, Eric gulps down his tea in one shot, while Tyria hides behind the newspaper to brush off the mood. Frozen in the middle of the room, the maid blinks in confusion, completely baffled by her master's panicked and flustered reactions. The noble estate's grand architecture stands tall beneath the bright sky, signaling preparations for the upcoming event. Walking side by side through the hall, the two discuss the weight of the invitation and what this royal summons truly means. Holding the letter sealed with the royal crest, Eric remarks in disbelief that he never imagined being invited to a palace banquet. Tyria reminds him that his family inherited a noble title, but Eric sighs with regret, feeling guilty over their arranged marriage. The young man opens up with heavy remorse, admitting his father's greed took advantage of the Wyvern family by forcing a marriage of convenience. Stopping in the middle of the hall, the lady lowers her gaze and calmly reveals that she has an important secret she never shared with him. Intrigued by her sudden confession, Eric stops in his tracks and turns around curiously to hear what she has to say. With flushed cheeks, Tyria firmly reveals that everything was entirely her own choice and that she never once saw their union as unwanted. Placing a hand over his chest, the young man asks if she truly wanted to marry him, and Tyria stammers out a shy confirmation. Dying of embarrassment, she bolts away and tells her husband to get ready, since the carriage journey will take many days. Reaching out to stop her, Eric asks in surprise if she really intended to travel all the way to the palace by carriage. Turning her bright red face back, Tyria asks in utter confusion how else they could possibly travel to the royal palace. The scene cuts to the Wyvern railway station, showcasing its grand glass structure beneath the bright sky. Clouds of warm steam blanket the busy platform as the noble couple waits among the passengers for the train's departure. Staring wide-eyed at the massive train, the lady nervously asks if that mountain of iron actually moves, catching Eric by surprise. Shrugging her shoulders bashfully, Tyria honestly confesses that she has only ever traveled to the capital by carriage. Eric breaks into a broad smile, explaining that the train will cover in just a few hours a trip that would take days on the road. Taking his wife's hand, the young man gallantly invites her to board the locomotive's elegant passenger car together. The friendly train attendant steps into their private cabin and politely asks if the passengers need anything. Clinging to her husband's chest, Tyria trembles in fear while Eric laughs and explains that it is his wife's very first train ride. Wrapping his arms gently around the noblewoman, the young man tells her not to be afraid, tenderly reminding her that he will always be by her side. The train's smokestack lets out a deafening whistle, releasing a thick plume of smoke as it gains speed down the tracks. Terrified by the sudden noise, Tyria's eyes widen with tears and she lets out a shriek of pure panic inside the cabin. In a panic, she begs to switch to a carriage, while Alaric chuckles and explains that it is just the sound of the steam. The sleek locomotive speeds across the vast snowy plains under a clear sky, charging toward its destination. With a gentle look, the young man invites his companion to gaze out the window to take her mind off the lingering fear of the trip. Drawing back the soft fabric curtain, a delicate hand reveals the cabin window, letting bright light flood the compartment. Looking outside, Tyria is completely mesmerized by the spectacular view. Much to the head of the house's delight, a breathtaking panorama of snow-capped mountains glitters under the radiant sun, creating an unforgettable natural painting. Resting her hands on the ledge, Tyria lets out a gasp of wonder, overjoyed to witness such moving beauty. Eric smiles warmly beside his wife and asks if the panoramic view is not far better than riding in a carriage. With her eyes sparkling with pure joy, Tyria turns with a bright smile and agrees that traveling by train truly is wonderful. Another interruption breaks their peaceful moment, making the young man turn his head with a sharp, serious look. The attendant presents a small decorated box, informing them that the package was sent from the first-class cabin. Opening the luxurious case, the young man finds an engraved gold bullet resting on the box's blue velvet lining. With a cold, sharp gaze, the veteran recognizes the very projectile that wounded his knee, concluding that the sniper is on the train. Holding the metal casing, he examines the number 103 engraved on the gold and deduces it is his rival's room. Glancing over at his wife, the young man decides to settle the matter quickly so as not to put the noblewoman in any danger. Keeping a calm smile, Arik asks his wife to wait for a moment, and Tyria agrees with quiet grace and respect. With steady steps and a focused expression, the young man leaves the compartment, while the noblewoman watches him go from inside. The elegant plaque on the first class door displays the number 103, confirming the sniper's exact location. Standing outside the room, the young man takes on a ruthless stance, his eyes turning crimson, ready to breach his rival's quarters. With silent precision, his hand turns the golden doorknob, swinging the door open to face whoever is waiting inside. Inside the lavish room, Edward waves cheerfully from the sofa beside Aang's, celebrating the swordsman's punctual arrival. With a mocking smirk, the Duke greets the former mercenary Kasha and pretends to correct himself on the proper name to use. Adjusting his glasses with heavy sarcasm, the chairman asks if he should now formally address him by the title of Lord Portman. In a split second, without a moment's hesitation, the young man draws the sharp dagger hidden at his waist, ready to strike. Lunging forward like lightning with his blade raised, Arik aims straight for Edward's throat, leaving the Duke wide-eyed in shock. Aang draws her gold-plated gun with flawless reflexes, pointing the barrel right at the young man to protect her master. Switching targets mid-air, the warrior intercepts the secretary's gun arm, pinning the weapon before a single shot can be fired. Pressing the dagger's razor edge against the woman's throat, Arik completely immobilizes her in a lethal hold. With incredible skill, the secretary draws a second firearm hidden beneath her skirt, aiming it straight at his gut. Locked in a deadly standoff, the two fighters remain frozen, pointing their weapons at point-blank range, mere inches apart. Breathing carefully, the young man meets Agnes's unyielding gaze, calculating the fatal risks of exchanging blows. Terrified by the imminent bloodshed in the car, Edward screams in sheer panic, ordering both of them to stand down. The Duke demands Agnes lower her weapons and show respect to Kasha, acknowledging him as one of the 7 strongest in the world. He then urges the veteran to pull back his blade, warning him that his trusted friend's aim is nothing to take lightly. The leader warns that even if her throat were slit, the marksman would still put 3 fatal rounds into him before hitting the floor. With a sharp mind and crimson eyes fixed on his foes, Arik weighs the consequences of this extremely dangerous impasse. In an imperceptible flash, the swordsman strikes with lightning speed, shattering the stunned marksman's defensive stance. Gunshots ring through the room as Elric surges forward, landing a devastating counterattack that sends blood flying. With blood trickling down his own face, the swordsman grits his teeth, his eyes filled with sheer tension. Regaining his composure in the face of danger, Elric silently concedes. Fully aware of the threat this standoff poses, holding a firm and flushed expression, Aang endures the knife at her neck without showing the slightest hint of weakness. Sheathing his blade, the young man firmly states that continuing this fight would be completely pointless for both sides. With slow, silent steps, the marksman paces across the room, keeping an entirely impassive expression. The bespectacled young man praises Kasha's choice and says he will grant him exactly 30 minutes to talk. Glaring at the nobleman, the swordsman demands he explain why he summoned him here within that short time frame. As the locomotive speeds down the snow-covered tracks, the conversation carries on inside the private car. Adjusting his glasses, Edward openly declares that the time has come for the legendary Kasha to retire from battle. Arik questions if he was called in just to hear that, since everyone across the continent already believes he vanished. Raising an index finger, the nobleman explains that he wants an official retirement announcement to settle the matter for good. Elric remains in absolute silence, staring at the man before him with a deeply serious and calculating gaze. The veteran replies that doing so would be quite difficult, as he has racked up far too many enemies over the years. He explains that stepping into the public eye would give away his location, and he has no intention of taking such a pointless risk. Rising from the sofa, sofa with a broad, eager grin, Edward proposes that they sign a brand new mercenary contract instead. With an icy demeanor, the swordsman turns down the offer on the spot, leaving the leader visibly uneasy. Clearly frustrated by the blunt rejection, the man sits back down, letting out a groan of pure dissatisfaction. Leaning forward, Edward asks what the Western Front truly meant to the warrior. The merchant proudly claims that to him, war was simply good business, generating fortunes for his organization. Gesturing with excitement, he explains that the shifting of the front lines represents the very flow of capital. Listening with total indifference, Eric asks what all that financial talk has to do with him. The man lowers his head, admitting he had the entire war under control, save for one single exception in his plan. With a troubled look, he states that the only variable outside his grasp emerged when the demon of the sword appeared. Edward emphasizes that the warrior is the single greatest risk to his business, which is why he is extending this special offer. Raising a finger in proposal, he tells the swordsman to either walk away from the battlefield entirely or come work under him. Crossing his arms, Eric silently takes in the man's proposal, holding an entirely unflinching posture. The young man rejects both options, but solemnly promises that he will never set foot on the Western Front ever again. He then demands that Duke White uphold his end and never cross paths with him again in the future. Turning his back with complete composure, the swordsman announces his departure and gets ready to leave the room. Glancing out of the corner of his eye, the merchant leader warns him in a stern tone that he had better keep his word. The man warns that he takes his business just as seriously as his rival cherishes his wife, stopping the young man in his tracks. With a faint smirk on his lips, Eric firmly replies that he will keep those words of warning very close to heart. Walking away down the corridor, the swordsman concludes by telling him to make sure neither of them pays a bitter price. The compartment door slams shut with a loud bang, echoing heavily throughout the train's luxurious car. Inside the quarters, the man calls out to his subordinate in a low voice, while still slumped on the sofa. Swaying nervously now that the tension has broken, Edward asks in total shock if she happened to bring a spare pair of underwear. The scene shifts to the Nimrod family's grand, opulent mansion, showcasing its architecture beneath the twilight sky. Wearing elegant white gloves, a hand knocks softly on the carved wooden door, announcing its presence. The elderly butler calls for young Master Amon, only to be met with a frantic shout telling him to wait outside. With his clothes disheveled and his face flushed, Amon appears at the door, disdainfully asking what the servant wants right now. The butler respectfully reports that he has just returned after delivering the commissioned tailcoat designed to the local tailor. Flustered and straightening her messy clothes, a maid quietly apologizes as she slips out of the noble's quarters. The lord paces around the room, while the servant reminds him of Sir Dalton's direct orders not to lay a hand on the household maids. Amon changes the subject by asking about Tyria, and the butler confirms that the young lady has already departed for the grand banquet. Thrilled by the news, the nobleman excitedly orders them to prepare a remarkably smooth and potent wine for the lady. Lost in his delusions, he imagines seducing the lovely woman with his touch until she can no longer pull herself away from him. The butler snaps him out of his daydream by revealing that Lord Elric, Tyria's husband, returned months ago, leaving the young man in shock. Furious, Amon rants about the man's audacity to return after 10 whole years, while the servant reveals the couple is traveling together. Pointing an angry finger, the master demands the servant track down that man's whereabouts and monitor his every move. Amon declares that he must meet him in person, and the lackey bows, taking the young heir's direct orders. Gritting his teeth, Amon angrily states that the noble's husband will soon learn he is completely unworthy of standing by Tyria's side. Standing before the Portman family mansion, Tyria smiles and remarks that it has been a very long time since the head of the house visited the place. Smiling back at his wife, Eric agrees, noting that during his childhood, he spent far more time in Wiban than at this estate. Pausing before the mansion's front entrance, the young woman invites him inside, and he happily accepts. The dark night settles over the grand Portman residence as warm, golden lights illuminate the noble mansion's windows. In an ornate frame on the wall, the portraits of the swordsman's parents stand out, elegantly captured on a beautiful canvas. Pointing at the painting, the young lord confesses to his wife in surprise that he had never seen that portrait of his parents before. Tyria explains that she salvaged the painting from storage and hung it up with her father in law's permission so the memory wouldn't be hidden away. Surprised by this, Eric asks if his father truly allowed it, and she confirms that although reluctant, the old man eventually agreed. The young man reflects thoughtfully, remembering that the previous patriarch would never allow anyone to bring up his mother's portrait in the past. Blushing shyly, his wife reveals that his father gave up the master bedroom so the couple could sleep together once he returned. Covering his embarrassed face, Eric apologizes, saying his father had no business telling her something so unnecessary. Elric points out that it is getting late and suggests she get some rest, prompting the young noblewoman to ask where he plans to sleep. Reassuring his wife with a gentle smile, the young man tells her he will spend the night in his old room so she can feel comfortable. Visibly frustrated by her partner's bashful attitude, Tyria awkwardly agrees and lets out a long, disappointed sigh. Wishing him good night in a deflated tone, the young woman heads down the hall, leaving the swordsman puzzled by her reaction. Throwing herself face down onto the spacious bed, Tyria screams her husband's name in pure agony over his total lack of initiative. Remembering the warm moments they shared, she wonders in frustration why he gets so shy at times like this. She imagines the swordsman offering a charming smile and suggesting that the two of them share the same bed tonight. In her mind, she sees herself firmly replying that there is nothing strange about a married couple sleeping in the same room. Kicking her legs angrily on the mattress, Tyria vents to herself, whining that this was exactly what he was supposed to say. A loud snap of splintering wood echoes through the mansion, startling the noblewoman as she realizes the sound came from the next room. Overcome with worry, the young noblewoman calls out frantically for her husband, fearing something dangerous happened next door. Stepping into the room, the maid points and explains that the bed collapsed, leaving the lord with no choice but to sleep on the floor. Embarrassed, Eric apologizes for the mess and says he will take the couch, but the noblewoman cuts him off, full of determination. Blushing furiously, Tyria seizes the moment and shyly suggests they both share the master bedroom tonight. Cautious footsteps echo down the quiet hallway while the starry night drapes over the traditional family's grand estate. On the dresser sit childhood photos of Eric beside his parents, as the faint sound of a door opening can be heard in the room. Inside the empty bedroom, the young maid gazes at the large wooden bed, gripping a sharp saw behind her back. With a focused stance and determined eyes, the maid raises the saw, set on carrying out her secret plan in the room. Gripping the tool tightly, the maid saws through the wood, firmly declaring she is doing all of this for the future of the Portman family. Carefully notching each side of the supports, the maid calculates the damage to ensure the bed will give out at just the right moment. Stepping out into the hallway, the maid wipes her brow in relief, pleased with herself for pulling off the sabotage without a hitch. Running into the servant in the hall, Elric gives a friendly wave and praises Mary's hard work before heading to his room for the night. The maid bows formally and bids her master good night, while the lord returns the kindness. Walking calmly along, the warrior enters his quarters and closes the wooden door, getting ready to rest, completely unaware of the trap that was set. Recalling the sound of the bed breaking, the maid cracks a sly grin, proud to have nudged the couple's intimacy forward. Lying back to back under the same sheet, the married couple lies in silence, swept up in an overwhelming romantic tension. With their faces burning bright red, Eric cannot bring himself to fall asleep, while young Tyria panics, unsure of what to do. Discreetly glancing over her shoulder, the young noblewoman is at a total loss for words, realizing she actually ended up in the same bed with him. Squeezing her eyes shut, the lady tries to control her racing heartbeat, terrified of losing her composure in a moment like this. Slowly turning his head, the young man blushes deeply and asks in a bashful whisper if she has managed to fall asleep yet. Utterly worn out by the built-up fatigue from the journey, young Tyria had already drifted into a heavy, deep slumber. Seeing the young lady resting so peacefully, the young man lets out a sigh of relief and wears a deeply affectionate smile. With calm, tender motions, the young man's hand gently caresses her blonde locks, brushing the soft strands away from his wife's face. Gazing at the lady's peaceful expression, the warrior whispers tenderly that she really must have been exhausted from the trip. In an unconscious movement in her sleep, Tyria suddenly wraps her arms around his chest, catching him completely off guard. His face flushed with pure embarrassment, the young man awkwardly pleads for his wife to open her eyes and let go of him. Snuggling even deeper into his chest, the nobleman sleepily mumbles his name, holding him tight as if he were a pillow. Sweating from pure nervousness, Eric tries desperately to keep his cool, dreading the unbearable embarrassment if she wakes up right now. Panicking, the swordsman imagines the noblewoman screaming furiously, accusing him of crossing the line in their shared bed. With his face burning with embarrassment, Elric desperately tries to maintain absolute control over his own impulses. Clinging to the lord's body, Tyria rubs against him in her sleep, leaving the young man completely stunned and unable to react. The night finally comes to an end, and the first rays of morning light blanket the noble estate after an exhausting, sleepless vigil. Waking to the morning light, the young noblewoman slowly opens her eyes, letting out a sleepy murmur in the soft bed. Realizing her hands are resting on the swordsman's chest, Tyria wakes up in shock and lets out a loud shriek, holding her blushing cheeks. The young lady beams with joy upon realizing she fell asleep snuggled in the lord's arms. Looking at her husband's peaceful face, she wonders if he pulled her into his arms while shifting in his sleep during the night. Seizing the opportunity, the girl happily hugs the young man, deciding to stay glued to his side just a little longer. A rooster crows loudly in the outer garden, echoing its morning call and shattering the dawn's peace with its noise. Startled by the shrill crowing, the warrior jolts awake and quickly sits up in bed, breathing heavily, still groggy from the sudden awakening. Auric turns his head and timidly calls out to the noblewoman lying beside him in bed. Seeing his wife pretending to be asleep, the young man sighs in relief, believing he dodged a terribly awkward moment. Beneath the covers, the young woman lies motionless, waiting in silence as she listens to her partner get out of bed. With silent footsteps, the swordsman walks toward the door and leaves the room to start his morning duties. The click of the door closing echoes through the sunlit room, leaving the noblewoman alone beneath the sheets of the massive bed. Gritting her teeth in anger, the lady grumbles in frustration at being interrupted by the rooster before she could enjoy the moment. Getting out of bed with fire in her eyes, Tyria swears up and down that she is going to put an end to that noisy backyard rooster. At the dining table, a mouth-watering golden, well-seasoned roasted chicken appears, ready to be served for breakfast. Staring at the dish with utter confusion, Eric awkwardly asks why they prepared a whole bird so early in the morning. Sitting at the table, Tyria sweetly says she made the special dish because she thought her husband needed to regain his strength. Giggling excitedly, the young lady changes the subject and enthusiastically asks if he has any design in mind for his new tailcoat. Eric admits he knows very little about noble etiquette and suggests consulting the head maid to choose the most suitable outfit. The scene cuts to the magnificent capital of the Kingdom of Ferdin, showcasing its imposing walls beneath a clear sky. Pulled by swift horses, the elegant noble carriage rolls steadily across the stone streets of the bustling capital. The head maid mentions she will take the couple to the tailor shop and tells Marie to go with the butler to buy a new bed for the lord. Inside the carriage next to the butler, Marie gives an excited salute, confirming the order with a broad smile on her face. Bowing with utmost politeness, the head maid invites Eric and Tyria to follow her straight to the tailor shop. Eric agrees with a smile beside Tyria and asks Rhonda to lead the way to the boutique for dresses and noble attire. The group arrives in front of Madame Selina's renowned tailor shop, showcasing its elegant wooden storefront bathed in sunlight. Stepping into the refined establishment, Rhonda calls for the owner, announcing the arrival of the distinguished nobles. Looking extravagant, the tailor beams with joy upon recognizing the former head maid after being apart for so long. The tailor hugs Rhonda enthusiastically, welcoming her and excitedly asking if they came to order new tailcoats. Tyria steps forward with a smile and politely explains that today's visit to the boutique is for a different matter. Realizing her oversight, Selena curtsies low, apologizing for the delay and formally greeting Lady Tyria. The young lady explains that they came to have a custom tailcoat made for the new patriarch of House Portman. Turning around with a courteous smile, the swordsman formally introduces himself as Eric Portman to the surprised designer. Hearing the name and sensing the young man's striking presence, Madame Selena's eyes go wide in utter shock. Bowing deeply, the seamstress offers her humble apologies for failing to recognize the great lord right away. A condescending voice cuts through the room, arrogantly stating that the young man has not yet received the official title of Baron. The head maid and the seamstress turn toward the door in confusion upon hearing such an insolent remark. Recognizing the unwelcome voice, Tyria's eyes widen, gripped by deep worry over the approaching intruder. Walking in with a snobbish posture, Ammon comments that ever since the previous lord's death, he hasn't heard of any succession ceremony. Approaching Elric with a mocking smirk, the Nimrod heir questions the swordsman with sheer provocation. Standing his ground against the insult, the swordsman merely wears a calm smile, showing no fear whatsoever. Eric replies amicably, figuring his rival will attend the banquet to settle this and introduce himself to the other court nobles. Ignoring the husband completely, Ammon turns around and calls out to the young lady, dramatically using her maiden name. The young man complains about the lack of a proper greeting, while Tyria glares at him with utter coldness and disgust for his behavior. Gesturing arrogantly, Ammon asks the young lady to explain the special relationship between them to the man. Standing there, with a cynical, taunting smirk, the noble insinuates that under the laws of the kingdom of Ferdin, the situation favors him much more. Faced with his rival's unexpected claim, the swordsman reacts with surprise, keeping a sharp and focused eye on the room. With an unhinged, mocking laugh, Ammon arrogantly declares that under the law, the two of them are officially married. A tense atmosphere takes over Madame Selena's refined boutique following that outrageous claim by the noble. Outraged by the noble's sheer audacity, Tyria's eyes widen as she tries to protest against that outrageous claim. Right then and there, Elric stays calm and cites the law on annulment due to non-consummation, proving he knows the rules inside and out. He calmly reveals that he left home in the past precisely to allow for the annulment of that arranged marriage. Ammon mocks the answer and asks with an air of superiority if the swordsman is unaware of the law's exception clause. With a confident smile on his lips, Elric replies that the rule upholds the sovereignty of either spouse's expressed will. The young man points out that his wife, Tyria, patiently waited for him for 10 long years, proving her true feelings. Eric drives the point home by saying that even a fool could see what the lady's intentions and loyalty were all this time. Glaring at his rival with deep malice, Ammon narrows his eyes, consumed by mounting fury over the humiliation. Face to face, the two men exchange tense smiles, and Ammon sarcastically sneers that this won't change his plans. Ignoring his foe, Eric turns away completely unbothered and calls for the boutique owner to change the subject. The young man asks for a recommendation for a good dessert shop for his wife, and the flustered seamstress stammers an answer amid the tension. Madame Selena escorts Tyria toward the boutique's exit, while ordering her assistant to serve tea to the two young nobles. With a stern, intimidating glare, Eric suggests they have a private chat away from everyone else. Dripping with mockery, the noble accepts, saying he's curious to hear what the son of a commoner merchant has to say. The fine porcelain teapot and cups are placed on the small wooden table, making a faint clink in the room. Sitting across from each other on the lounge couches, the two rivals lock eyes, maintaining a tense posture in the silence. Leaning back disdainfully in his seat, Ammon asks in a sarcastic tone what the young lord wants to discuss in private. Getting straight to the point, the swordsman says he'll keep it brief and coldly demands that the man stop coveting his lawful wife. Laughing cynically, the noble questions how he dares call her his wife after abandoning her on their very first day of marriage. With a stern, defiant look, Ammon openly declares that he has been courting Tyria since the day his rival fled the city. Touching his own chest, he claims he is far more worthy of being her husband than someone who heartlessly abandoned her. Pointing out the warrior's shortcomings, the heir arrogantly repeats that the swordsman is not worthy of standing by Tyria's side. Flashing a wicked smile, the man shifts his tone and pauses mysteriously, hinting at a bold new proposition. Spreading his arms in false generosity, Amon promises to step out of the couple's way if a single request is granted. Rising a single finger in a smug tone, he warns that he will only agree to back down if his rival fulfills one condition. With a vile, unhinged look on his face, Amon asks to spend just a single night with the swordsman's wife. In an explosion of fury, Arik kicks the table, shattering the porcelain cups and splintering the wood midair. Taking the full, violent brunt of the table, the noble's eyes widen in shock as he lets out a shrill scream of pain. Without a second's hesitation, the veteran delivers a devastating punch straight to Amon's face, shattering his noble composure. From the brutal impact of the blow, the hare's body is sent flying backward, crashing violently onto the lounge couch. Terrified by the sound of destruction, the boutique staff turn around in shock, fearing for their safety. Coldly tearing off his coat, Arik tosses it aside and advances relentlessly toward the noble lying on the floor. Grabbing his rival by the collar and neck, the young man squeezes hard while the battered noble asks if he knows who he's dealing with. Rising a clenched fist in pure rage, Elric roars that he couldn't care less about his lineage, leaving Amon trembling in terror. Panicked by the imminent violence, the maid rushes toward the room, screaming to stop the lord from killing him right there. Redirecting the punch at the very last second, the swordsman smashes the wall, splintering the wood right next to the terrified noble's head. Pinning the enemy down, Arik sternly warns that he tolerates insults directed at himself, but will never forgive any disrespect toward Tyria. Radiating a murderous aura with glowing red eyes, the warrior whispers in an icy voice that he will ensure a gruesome death for his rival. Utterly terrified by the death threat, Amon weeps in sheer panic and apologizes, admitting he was wrong. In another part of the city, the butler and the maid arrive at a furniture shop, looking for the store owner. Rubbing his hands together enthusiastically, the friendly salesman welcomes them and asks if they're looking for a new bed. The merchant shows off a piece of luxury furniture, proudly claiming the model is wildly popular among the capital's nobility. Adjusting his monocle with a serious look, the butler asks to inspect the product, and the salesman warmly obliges. Upon receiving the butler's nod, the maid Marie readies a heavy mace, prepared to test the bed's durability. Letting out a battle cry, Marie charges full force at the furniture, sending the shop owner into complete despair. The bed snaps in half under the blow, and the butler calmly notes that the piece's durability leaves much to be desired. With veins popping on his forehead from rage, the owner fumes furiously, demanding to know what on earth they think they're doing. Wearing white gloves, the butler hands a heavy pouch of coins to the merchant to cover the damage to the furniture. Opening the bag and seeing the brilliant gleam of gold, the salesman is dazzled, instantly forgetting all his anger. Straightening his posture with elegance, the butler asks in a firm tone if the man can have the new bed ready in 2 days. Clutching the bag of gold, the shop owner ecstatically replies that if he wishes, he can have the furniture ready this very day. Giving a knowing wink, the servant clarifies that there won't be any problem if the job takes more than 2 days. Catching on to the secret plan, the salesman winks back and suggests it will take at least 3 days to finish the repair. Highly satisfied with the arrangement, the butler asks for the total cost, showing that the whole goal was to keep the couple sharing a room. The narrative cuts to the imposing Nimrod estate, highlighting its architecture under the dark cloak of night. Inside the luxurious lounge, red wine is poured smoothly, filling the crystal goblet with a crimson liquid. Setting the dark glass bottle on the table, the Count rests his arm with utter calm in the quiet stillness of the room. Sitting on the couch before the grand window, the Count relaxes with his glass as the peaceful night envelopes the chamber. A cold breeze blows outside the tall arched windows, casting a sinister mood over the noble estate. Count Dalton Nimrod apologizes for reaching out during a busy time and reveals that he needs to hire someone for an urgent job. Emerging from the shadows, the hooded assassin gets straight to the point and asks only for the name of the target to be eliminated. Keeping a cold demeanor beneath his hood, the mercenary guarantees he will carry out the hit in an exceptionally clean and discreet manner. Taking a sip of his drink, the Count whispers the name of his target with a threatening look, declaring it to be Eric Portman. Before the wide window of his grand estate, the noble stares out into the night's darkness as he plots his cruel scheme. Furrowing his brow with malice, Dalton mutters the name Hoban Portman, revealing a grudge held for many long years. Moments later, the hooded assassin cautiously asks if there are any specific dangers to avoid during the mission. Drinking calmly, Dalton instructs the killer to keep the operation under absolute secrecy so as not to arouse any suspicion. Turning his back to leave, the criminal suggests that a sudden death far from home would be the ideal method of attack. With a cruel smirk, the Count praises the idea, claiming that the downfall of that lowly family will be a magnificent spectacle. Formally accepting the deadly contract, the mysterious figure melts into the air, leaving the room to the quiet night. Holding his glass, Dalton laments never having had the chance to end Hoban Portman's life with his own two hands. Taking a long sip of wine, the Count coldly promises that he will make absolutely sure to take the rival heir's life. The crystal glass is set down firmly on the table, sealing the ruthless, deadly decision made during that dark conversation. The scene returns to the Portman estate, resting in perfect tranquility beneath the starry sky of that chilly night. Seated at the long dining table, the two nobles have their evening meal as the clinking of silverware breaks the silence. Chewing her food thoughtfully, Tyria seems lost in thought while her husband watches her with tender attention. Noticing the scrapes on the Lord's knuckles, Tyria asks with concern what happened to her husband's hand. Caught off guard by the question, the young man looks at his knuckles and lets out an awkward laugh. Trying to play it off, he makes up an excuse that he tried to catch a fly buzzing around the tailor's shop and ended up getting a slight scratch. Suspicious of such a childish excuse, his wife looks at him calmly, accepting the answer with an unconvinced look in her eyes. At a loss for words under that piercing gaze, Eric looks away, remaining quiet for the rest of dinner. In the spacious, quiet bedroom, the main bed sits neatly made, waiting for the couple's decision for another night. Seeing that the other furniture hasn't arrived yet, Eric grows nervous and asks in surprise if the extra bed wasn't delivered. Feigning innocence, Marie and the head maid make up a story that a termite infestation ruined the stock at the capital's furniture shops. Chuckling sheepishly, the blushing young man asks if he can share the bed for one more night, while the maids celebrate behind him. Her face red with embarrassment, Tyria agrees without hesitation, gladly welcoming her husband's presence in the same bed. Holding Tyria's delicate hand with deep affection, the young man suggests with a warm smile that they head into the bedroom. The two loyal maids watch the door close behind the couple, standing watch in the quiet hallway, exchanging knowing glances. The head maid and the young servant celebrate the complete success of their little romantic scheme. Thrilled with the result, the two high-five, cheering for their masters growing closer and closer at the estate. In the room's soft blue twilight, the couple lies side by side, sharing the blankets amid the silence of the night. Breaking the nighttime silence, Tyria brings up the delicate topic and asks hesitantly about what Ammon said at the tailor shop. Sitting up in bed, Eric sincerely apologizes and mentions that he needed to tell her something very important. He expresses deep sorrow for having left her to endure that man's humiliations all on her own for 10 long years. The noblewoman listens in surprise as the swordsman confesses his guilt for making her life so difficult during his absence. With eyes full of sincerity and remorse, the warrior asks for forgiveness from the bottom of his heart for all the pain he caused. Moved by her husband's heartfelt words, Tyria covers her face with both hands and bursts into tears of pure emotion on the bed. Pulling his wife tenderly into his arms, Eric holds her in a warm embrace, comforting her tears. Gently caressing the young woman's back, he says he cannot turn back time, but makes a sincere promise to her. Closing his eyes lovingly beside his wife, the young swordsman swears he will never leave her alone in the world again. Deeply touched by his words, the young woman breaks down crying like a child in the arms of her husband, who smiles with tenderness. The serene night blankets the Portman estate as the young lord gently asks his wife to wipe away her tears. The narrative cuts to the Moon's Shadow Assassin's branch, operating under the guise of an ice cream parlor in the capital. Donem, the chief of the Furden branch, raises his voice, calling for the attention of all the subordinates gathered in the hall. Standing before the large table, he announces to the mercenaries that a new assassination contract was issued by Count Dalton. One of the men asks in surprise why they are taking on an extra job when their primary operation is right around the corner. The chief reassures the crew, explaining that the new target is just an ordinary, weak frontier noble named Eric Portman. He highlights that completing the job will earn them a massive fortune, allowing them to finally live in comfort. Sitting at the table, the commander lets out a long, thoughtful sigh while the two subordinates wait in silence. Gritting his teeth, he curses Kasha, recalling with bitter hatred that it was because of him that they were demoted. The subordinate smiles optimistically, noting that the legendary Kasha doesn't operate in this region, which makes the situation very favorable. The other mercenary eagerly agrees, admitting that being so far from the dreaded warrior is an excellent opportunity. The chief plans to turn Furden into a battlefield to open up countless chances to get rich off the destruction. With a wicked grin on his face, Danem looks for his partner's approval to carry out that scheme in the kingdom. Slamming his gloved hand down on the wood, the leader ends the discussion, establishing the plan for the impending strike. Rising his fists, he passionately roars that they will use this mission to prove their worth to the supreme leaders of the Woliang. The assassin cautiously asks how exactly they plan to approach and eliminate the young noble Eric in the city. Snapping his fingers slyly, the commander calmly replies that he has already devised a flawless infiltration strategy. He reveals that the Portman family posted openings for stylists, and they will use that disguise to infiltrate the mansion. With malicious chuckles, the group cheers at the idea of ensuring the pathetic noble never even makes it to the royal banquet alive. The leader orders everyone to get some sleep so they can wake up early tomorrow to infiltrate the Portman estate. The oath echoes from within the ice cream parlor, sealing the nighttime conspiracy with the solemn motto of the Shadow Organization. On a sunny morning, the scene returns to the Portman estate where the newly hired hands approach, dressed in woman's attire. The soft rustle of long dresses echoes along the stone path as the group makes their way toward the mansion's entrance. With utmost courtesy, the butler greets the supposed stylists and warmly invites them inside the estate. Walking down the hallway, Eric grumbles about having to get dressed up, while the head maid tries to hush his complaints. Rhonda sternly warns the patriarch, reminding him that yesterday's brawl put their family in direct conflict with Count Dalton. She nudges the young man through the door, warning that the rumor of him beating Ammon's face has spread all over the capital. Sitting the lord down in a chair, the head maid warns that all the nobles allied with Dalton have become their sworn enemies. Closing his eyes with a calm sigh, Eric honestly admits that he also regrets what he did to that young man. He adds that he should have crushed his rival's head like a watermelon, making Rhonda shriek in sheer horror. The head maid emphasizes that he needs to look spotless so he won't be looked down upon by the other nobles at the banquet. Two knocks sound on the wooden door, and the head maid turns around excitedly, figuring the styling team has just arrived. Before opening the door, Rhonda firmly insists that the warrior behave himself and let the woman do their work. Bowing respectfully, she steps aside for the three extravagantly dressed figures to enter the main room. With his sharp warrior instincts, Eric glances over, watching the newcomers with deep suspicion and intense focus. Holding the skirts of their dresses, the three disguised assassins give a dramatic bow, greeting the lord of the house. Staring down the noble beneath his heavy makeup, Danem puts on an intimidating look, whispering the name Eric Portman. Everything flashes back 4 years to the Cheber border defense line, where Eric is seen sitting, polishing his sword with a thoughtful look on his face. Just then, a hooded man calmly walks up to him. The man kneels, addressing him as Kasha and presenting a finely crafted weapon from the east. Elric takes the scabbard, confused as to why he is receiving this gift. The man explains that the sword is a tribute from the Moon's Shadow Assassins. Drawing the blade, the protagonist immediately notices just how sharp it is. He bluntly asks what they really want in return for it, The man asks him to stop interfering in their organization's affairs. Auric looks puzzled, firing back that he doesn't even remember meddling in anything. The assassin reminds him that 5 of their members died by his hand, ruining their mission. Smiling, Eric replies that if they have a problem with that, they should just stay out of his way. The man questions if he really wants to make an enemy of the guild by refusing the deal. While a young recruit watches the tense standoff, gripping his dagger, the warrior simply tells them to take the warning to heart so they don't regret it later. Back in the present at the Portman estate, the mood shifts completely. Danum gives an exaggerated bow, saying it's an honor to meet the new patriarch. He stares down the young lord with a dark glare, addressing him as Eric Portman, but Elric immediately recognizes him and asks why on earth he's wearing that dress. Danum goes into full panic mode as he realizes this young noble is the fearsome Kasha. Eric mocks him with a laugh, asking if he quit being an assassin just to become a pervert. Breaking into a cold sweat, the leader tries to play it off, claiming he only came to speak with Elric Portman. Elric casually points out that he's the very person they're looking for. The protagonist locks eyes with him, asking if they came to hunt him down this time. Desperate on the inside, Danum tries to keep his cool so they can slip away without raising suspicion. He stammers out a lie, saying they're working as attendants to practice their disguises. He turns to his subordinates, begging them to back up his lame excuse. But his 2 companions are already drawing their daggers, ready to strike their target. They shout that their cover is blown, and that they need to take the target out immediately. Elric sarcastically asks if nobles use sharp daggers to fix their hair these days. Full of confidence, the 2 charge forward, telling their boss to step back and let them handle it. Danum panics, knowing these idiots have no clue what kind of danger they're in. Meanwhile, the scene cuts to the elegant hall, where preparations for the banquet are underway. Nobles chat casually to the soft sound of festive palace music. Count Dalton gloats, thinking the young Portman hasn't even shown his face. He catches himself with a grin, confident the boy couldn't make it at all. Dalton turns to the hooded man, finding it strange that the hired assassins are running late, and asks if the Grand Regent's presence means everything is fully under control. The mysterious regent of the Western Empire merely gives a faint smile beneath his hood. He reassures the Count, saying he gave them a simple task, and they'll be arriving shortly. The man then sternly warns Dalton not to forget their agreed terms, giving him a dark look and stating that if the mission fails, their entire deal is off. Back in the room, the 2 female assassins are already sprawled on the floor, knocked out cold. While Danum kneels with a bruised head, begging Kasha to believe him, Elric calmly corrects him, stating that his real name is Eric now. He firmly emphasizes that he should be addressed as Eric Portman, not Kasha anymore. Hurriedly accepting the correction, the leader goes back to pleading for his life. He confesses they were paid by Dalton, but swears they never would have taken the job had they known who he was. Ulrich stays quiet, processing all this valuable information. The protagonist figures he expected an attack from Dalton, just not one this aggressive. Elric realizes that leaving things as they are could put everyone around him in serious danger. Danum reveals that the organization's original mission was to eliminate the foreign envoy attending the banquet. Surprised, Eric asks if Count Dalton was behind that scheme as well. The protagonist tries to make sense of why the noble would target a visiting diplomat. The assassin explains that Dalton intends to expand the war from the west into the east. Elric is stunned, wondering what on earth that crazy old man is plotting. He deduces that if the war spreads, the enemies will focus their attacks on Weaven. Determined, he decides he will never let Tyria be put in harm's way. With a focused gaze, Eric calls out to the man before him with authority. He announces that as of right now, he is placing the entire group under arrest for attempted murder, declaring them as prisoners, stripped of all their freedom. However, the young warrior pauses before making an offer, promising that if they help him, he's willing to grant them all a full pardon. Eric looks Danum right in the eye, asking if he's willing to cooperate. The assassin leader ponders in silence, carefully weighing the consequences of his choice. He bows solemnly, giving his true name and title, swearing to dedicate his honor and freedom to Eric and obey his every command. Satisfied with the response, the patriarch accepts the man's loyalty, demanding he immediately spill everything he knows about Dalton's plans. Meanwhile, the two companions on the floor begin to regain consciousness. Groaning in pain, Danum reveals that Dalton's soldiers are hiding in a warehouse behind the hall to stir up chaos. Elric firmly states that he'll deal with that group of soldiers personally and instructs Danum to head straight back to Dalton and stick to the plan. The scene shifts to the night, showing the quiet surroundings of the warehouse. Inside the shack, Dalton's armed men are chatting, completely off guard. Suddenly, a masked Elric appears, announcing that Dalton called off the mission and that everyone needs to leave. The men grow suspicious, claiming they don't even know Dalton, and ask if he's a spy. Laughing, they draw their weapons and demand the intruder slowly take off his mask. Sighing, Eric realizes he won't be able to settle this with words alone. He shuts the door and coldly warns them that he gave them a fair chance to run. Infuriated by his nerve, the mercenaries all charge at once to kill him. One man swings his sword, but the warrior effortlessly dodges, landing a devastating direct punch that drops his first opponent. Another enemy tries to lunge with a blade, taking advantage of the opening, but gets hit with a clean counterattack before he can even get close. Two more soldiers rush in together, trying to corner the young man. But the protagonist moves like lightning, striking both of them with pinpoint precision, knocking out the rest of the mercenaries in a matter of seconds without breaking a sweat. With all the enemies defeated and unconscious on the ground, Eric gets ready to leave. Adjusting his mask, he mutters that none of this would have happened if they had just listened to his warning. Meanwhile, Dalton checks his watch, furious over the delay from the hired assassins, when suddenly, sharp blades press against his neck, making the Count freeze in terror. Danum appears from behind, ordering the noble to shut his mouth and keep his voice down. Terrified, Dalton demands to know the reason for this betrayal, bringing up the contract they signed. The assassin replies that the plan changed because things didn't go as expected. The Count breaks into a cold sweat, staring at the dangerous gleam of the blades against his skin. Danum leans close to the noble's ear, keeping his tone calm yet menacing. He lies, claiming Elric forced him to switch sides and that the whole operation was exposed. Dalton flies into a rage, cursing the Portman family for constantly ruining his plans. While Danum watches him closely, planning the next step of the trap he set up, Dalton readily agrees, saying they need to act fast. He orders the assassin to stay hidden by his side and kill the envoy this very day. With that, the two walk down the hallway together to put the ambush into motion. The scene cuts to the entrance of the chamber, guarded by two royal sentries. The guards stay sharp, watching for the slightest movement in the corridor. Seeing Eric approach, one of the guards holds up a hand, demanding his identification. The protagonist introduces himself as Eric Portman and asks to speak with the diplomat. The guard denies him entry, and Eric realizes that the death of a duke would trigger an all-out war. Urgently, Elric insists he needs to speak with the duke without waiting for red tape. Maintaining a rigid stance, the sentry repeats that his entry is strictly forbidden. Frustrated, the warrior clenches his fist, ready to force his way through. Just then, someone calls out his name, making the young man turn around in surprise. A white-haired figure in a wheelchair rolls up laughing, calling out to Eric. Elric is stunned to discover that his old acquaintance Graham is the envoy in question. Graham smirks, whispering the legendary title of Sword Demon. Walking through the garden, Eric admits his surprise, while Graham says he's glad to see him again. The visitor then asks why the warrior was looking for him so desperately. A bit awkward, Elric scratches his head, trying to figure out how to explain the whole mess, until a voice cuts in, announcing the imminent arrival of His Majesty. Revealed to be Count Dalton, approaching with a formal air, Dalton greets Graham, taking the chance to feign regret over the fight his son started. Elric mocks him in return, saying he didn't expect the kid to go crying to his daddy, and adds that he'll make sure Graham gets to the hall right on time so Dalton doesn't have to worry. With a sadistic smile, Dalton claims the diplomat won't be going anywhere. He lies, stating that Duke Graham will be assassinated right here by Eric Portman, and that when the royal guard arrives, they'll find the Duke dead and the culprit brought to justice. adding that the young Portman will be executed on the spot without mercy. Hearing this whole performance, Eric simply gives him a cold, sharp look, while Dalton's personal bodyguard draws his sword, ready to strike. Eric mocks the little theatrical act, suggesting Dalton hire a better writer, remarking that even someone with a hole in their head could come up with a smarter plan. Dalton smirks with disdain, replying that he's going to love the star of the show, calling forth the hooded assassin, who emerges silently right behind him. Sharp iron claws gleam on the mercenary's hand, ready to strike. Dam takes an intimidating combat stance beside the Count, and seeing the trap sprung on Dalton, Eric smiles, praising the guild for a job well done.